Chapter 84. Julian waved her hand and said, "This is just a private conversation between you and me, there is no need for anyone else to know. You know very well that Amon is from a foreign country, and the scrolls left behind by Nero are very precious, and he may also know something that should not be said. If one day a conflict breaks out with a neighboring country, you do not want to see those scrolls on the battlefield, do you? In addition, instead of reminding me, Lord Dick, it is better to care about the nephews of the Ramos family. You should know better what some of them are thinking." Rod Dick nodded. "Thank you for the reminder, Lord Dick. I said these words today, in fact, for your sake." Julian smiled again. "Thank you for your consideration, Lord Dick. Fortunately, I understand your noble character, everything is for my own good. If it were someone else, they might be puzzled." Rod Dick stood up and said, "Sorry to disturb your rest, I will take my leave first. I wish us a happy cooperation in Cape States." Rod Dick had already understood that Julian might make a move against Amon, which was not what he wanted to see. But Rod Dick could not stop Julian from doing something that he had not yet done, and even if he did, he would not admit it. Julian only promised that no matter what happened, it would be done in secret and not in public, so that the honor of Rod Dick and the city would not be damaged. If Julian really made a move against Amon, what could Rod Dick do? As Julian asked, if there was anything between the Supreme Mage and Amon, who would Rod Dick protect? There was no need to answer this question. Rod Dick had already tried to dissuade Julian, but if he failed, he could only choose to compromise and pretend that he did not know. "Let's hope that Amon is already far away. Let's wish the boy good luck. Since he was able to survive that great flood, let's wish him a smooth escape this time." When Rod Dick returned to the mansion, he saw that the coconut shell box that Aristotle had sent was still on the table in his bedroom. He felt a little ashamed and silently prayed to the gods. Then, he added a generous gift and ordered someone to send the coconut shell back to Aristotle along with the box. On the official road leading to the border east of Cape States, there was a carriage galloping along. The coachman was a strong warrior. The curtains of the carriage were drawn, so it was impossible to see who was sitting inside. There were also 3 warriors following on fast horses. It looked like a wealthy merchant and his bodyguards were transporting something valuable. However, upon closer inspection, one would find that the carriage was very light and sturdy. The horse pulling the carriage was also 1 in 100, and it ran very fast. Obviously, the warriors had received strict training. Their horsemanship was excellent. They also had a change of horses, as if they were traveling at full speed. No one knew that the man in the carriage was Julian's confidant, Vitru. The warrior in the front was Julian's personal guard, Haven. They were the team that Julian had sent to hunt down Amon. They had been traveling for more than half a day. At a fork in the road, Haven suddenly reined in his horse and stopped. The carriage also stopped. Vitru lifted the curtains and asked, "Haven, what's wrong? Why did you stop?" Haven jumped off the horse and said in a low voice, "The target's carriage might have turned to the seaside. I need to confirm it." The coachman asked curiously, "Captain, how do you know the target has turned to the seaside? It hasn't been raining recently. The target's carriage has only been there for less than a day. We can still see the ruts in many places. We just need to check the front and the sides carefully." The coachman asked again, "But there are a lot of ruts here." The coachman was Julian's nephew, and he had a lot of questions. Haven didn't want to waste his breath explaining. He pulled out his saber and slashed at the wheel, leaving a shallow dent. "Drive the carriage forward for some distance, then come back and look at the ruts you left behind," Haven said. The warrior named Shoot really drove the cart for a distance. Then, he got out of the cart and looked back. The ruts left in the mud would leave a mark at every distance. Some were blurry, while others were clear. If one looked carefully, they could always be found. Every chariot's wheels would have bumps and bruises on them, so the ruts had their own unique markings. Haven's eyesight was very good. Even though he was riding on a fast horse, he could still accurately spot the marks left by Amon's chariot. Amon did not go to the border as people had expected. Instead, he turned to the north, which was the road leading to the port town. Vitru and the others chased after him. They had set out half a day later than Amon. It wasn't too long, but it wasn't too short either. They could still see the ruts on the road. There was no fork in the road, so they just had to speed up. After half a day, it was already afternoon. The warriors could still hold on, but the horses were tired. They had to change horses and continue. Vitru sat in the carriage and said, "The sun is about to set. That guy should stop and rest. We're very fast. We should be able to catch up with him when he's camping at night." Haven shook his head and said, "He's not slow either. His carriage and horses are in good condition. We can see that he's running at full speed. We've been chasing him for a whole day, but we haven't gotten any closer. His driving skills are very good." This was an interesting misunderstanding. Amon was a fast runner, but he wasn't good at driving. But he was using the whip given to him by Enrol. All he had to do was gently whip the whip in the air, and he could control the horse with ease. It was much easier than a skilled coachman. Vitru frowned. "Doesn't he need to rest?" Haven replied, "He's driving a light carriage. Both horses are good. Tash and Wellington gave them to him. He needs to rest, but don't forget that we also need to rest. We're in the mountains after dark. We can't run at night. We're already half a day behind. Even if he's camping at night, we won't be able to catch up with him tomorrow." Vitru said, "Then we must hurry. If he gets to the port, we won't be able to catch up with him. There's something wrong with him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have run away like this. Lord Julian is too wise." They didn't stop to rest until it was too dark for them to catch up with Amon. At daybreak, they changed horses and set out again. Julian's personal guards were only there to protect the mage. Apart from showing off their strength, they didn't suffer much hardship. Of course, it was hard work to travel at such a high speed. Vitru was in the carriage. Fortunately, the rest of them were advanced warriors, so they were able to hold on. What they were worried about didn't happen. After another day of chasing, they found that Amon's carriage had changed direction again. This time, it was heading back to the west. It was a road along the coastline, bypassing the city of Cape and heading towards the neighboring city of Tnais. Vitru was puzzled. He asked Haven, "What's wrong with this Amon? Does he want to go to Danis instead of leaving the border?" Haven thought for a moment. That's the direction he's going. But he's not going to Danis. Maybe he wants to go somewhere else. Vitru asked, "He's running all the way to Danis. Why doesn't he leave the territory of Igut?" Haven shook his head. "He's rich. He doesn't even have a bodyguard. Of course he wants to leave as soon as possible. He probably doesn't know that we're chasing him. He's just being cautious. Just as Lord Julian said, he must have some secrets." Amon didn't know that someone was following him, but he had considered the possibility. Therefore, after he left Cape, he headed east. He traveled at a fast speed and took a detour in a deserted place. Normally, he would be able to get rid of his pursuers. However, he didn't expect to run into Haven's group, who were chasing him from behind. It wasn't easy riding for several days. The warriors were tired. On the third day, they took turns to rest in the carriage. Their speed gradually slowed down. Amon slowed down as well. His horse was also tired. He maintained the same distance for about half a day. The road they took led to the city of Danis. Haven wasn't worried that Amon would run away. After all, he needed to rest in the city. As long as he stayed for a day, he would be able to catch up. There were more and more towns along the way. There were also many carriages and pedestrians. The tracks of the carriages couldn't be seen clearly. Along the way, Haven asked if there was a luxurious carriage passing by. The driver was a young man. Many people had an impression that the carriage Aman was driving belonged to Tushuan Wellington. The only difference was that it didn't have the noble decorations and family insignia, so it was indeed very conspicuous on the road. According to the information he got and the intermittent tracks, Aman was getting closer and closer. Julian's nephew, Shoot, asked Haven again, "Captain, since you can find the tracks and there are no forks in the road, why do you keep asking?" Haven explained patiently, "People can change carriages, and carriages can also change drivers. We're chasing people, not carriages." So far, Aman hasn't changed carriages. His carriages and horses are very good. It seems that he doesn't know that we're chasing him. As they continued to chase, Haven discovered something. Halfway through the journey, Aman camped in the dense forest. The next day, he couldn't find any traces of the carriage, but the tracks were still there. The reason was simple. Aman knew that the carriage he was riding in was very conspicuous. When he crossed Cape from the north, he was worried that someone would accidentally recognize him, so he made some small modifications to the carriage. He had been taught by Crazy O. Although he hadn't processed magic artifacts yet, it was easy for him to change the carriage's appearance. The surface of the luxurious wood had been blackened and yellowed. It looked a little old and looked like an ordinary carriage. The shed had also been modified, removing unnecessary decorations. The color was also different from the original. Aman was cautious enough to avoid detection, but Haven and the others were still following him. The distance between them was getting closer and closer. Haven followed the tracks and asked along the way. Finally, he found out that Aman's carriage had changed its appearance. Some of them still remembered the driver. He was a young man, driving with a whip in his hand. There was a branch on the shaft of the carriage. At noon, Haven estimated that they would enter the city of Danis by dusk. On the road in the wilderness, they found another set of tracks. Vitru lifted the curtain and asked, "How far are we from the target, Haven?" "We're getting closer," answered Haven. "Only a few dozen miles away." Vitru waved his hand. "Shoot, stop the carriage. I'll use magic to track him. This distance should be enough." Vitru got off the carriage and walked to the track. He took out an object. It was a parangan with a pedestal, like a lamp. The pedestal was engraved with the pattern of a magic circle. Vitru held the parangan in one hand and waved his staff with the other. The parangan shone brightly, as if a lamp had been lit. A circle of light spread out from the parangan. The image of the ruts was reflected in the aperture, constantly changing. The ruts extended forward intermittently, as if they were chasing after Aman's carriage at full speed. Before long, a carriage appeared in the circle of light. The image changed to show the front of the carriage. The trackers finally saw Aman. The stranger was still wearing the old clothes he wore when he first arrived in Cape States. He had a whip in his hand and a branch on the shaft of the carriage. The warriors praised him in unison. "Lord Vitru, we finally found him. Look, there's a town ahead of him. He might stop there to rest. Let's speed up. We'll catch up with him in no time." Vitru was an excellent 6th-level mage. He could already use advanced magic, but he couldn't use both detection and tracking magic at the same time. He had to rely on a magic artifact to do it. As a senior priest from the Temple of Isis, he was naturally rich. Vitru put away the magic artifact with a complacent look on his face. He smiled and said, "Don't do it in the town. We'll outflank him and wait for him to leave the town. Then we'll capture him in the wilderness. This guy is really hard to deal with. Fortunately, he met me and Captain Haven. Otherwise, he won't be able to escape." A town appeared in front of them. Aman slowed down the carriage. He sat on the shaft and gently caressed Schrödinger. Then he took out a bottle of wine and fed it to Schrödinger. He had traveled so far with great caution. No one should be able to detect him. Schrödinger had been sleeping all this time. Occasionally, he would wake up, yawn, stretch himself, eat something, drink some wine, and then go back to sleep. It seemed that Schrödinger was recovering. Aman was relieved. However, Schrödinger didn't lick the wine out of habit. Instead, it suddenly opened its eyes. Its fur stood on end, and it arched its body in Aman's arms. It let out a cry and pointed a paw behind them. It was the first time that Aman had heard Schrödinger cry since they met in the desert. It was also the first time that he saw Schrödinger make such a big movement. At this moment, the cat, which couldn't even be detected by detection magic, seemed to release some kind of aura. Aman's special ability from the underworld activated. He could sense the emotion in Schrödinger's cry. It sounded like a warning, telling Aman that there was danger behind them. Aman quickly pulled over and jumped onto the road to look back, but he didn't find anything. He looked up at the sky again. There wasn't even a bird. Schrödinger was still twisting in his arms, as if it was struggling to get down. Aman gently put the cat on the ground. The weak cat stumbled back the way it came, scratching the ground with its paw at regular intervals. Aman followed and observed carefully. He found that Schrödinger had drawn a line at regular intervals in the ruts. The right wheel of the car he was driving had a triangular gap at some point, and the mark left on the ground was very obvious. Aman suddenly realized something. He picked up Schrödinger, jumped into the car, and rode away. As the saying goes, a wise man is bound to make a mistake. Aman had no experience in escaping, nor did he realize that he was fleeing. He just habitually did not want to expose his whereabouts, so he did not consider it thoroughly. After Schrödinger's reminder, he realized that the ruts could also be a clue that could be followed. Vitru and the others galloped to the town. They went around the town and set up ambushes on both sides of the road. Haven entered the town alone to look for Aman. Haven entered the town from another direction with a smile on his face. He didn't find any traces of Aman's carriage, which meant that he was still in the town. But when Haven entered the town, his face suddenly changed. He saw Aman's carriage in the market. He walked over and asked around, only to find out that not long ago, a stranger had sold the carriage at a very low price, along with the 2 tired horses. He only exchanged it for the best horse in the market, and it had already galloped out of the town. Vitru's ambush had failed. Aman had already left. Aman should have entered the city of Danesi. Vitru was flustered and exasperated when he heard the news, that bastard. Did he know that we were following him? Did he play a trick on me? When we catch him and interrogate him, we'll tear him to pieces. Haven's face darkened. He thought for a moment and said, he might not have known that we were following him. He just erased all traces before he arrived at the city. He's a very cautious man. But it doesn't matter. If he enters the city, we'll still be able to find him. Shoot couldn't help but interrupt, Lord Vitru, you can use magic to track him. Vitru wanted to glare at him, but he controlled himself and explained, he's so far away, and there's no detection device. How can I track him? Shoot asked again, Captain Haven, if you can follow the ruts of a carriage, can you also follow the footprints of a horse? Haven said impatiently, there are so many people in the city. How can we find his tracks? Vitru sneered, it's already dark. He must be tired after traveling for so many days. He must be staying in the city tonight. I'm a good friend of the mayor of Danesi. I'll use Lord Julian's name as an excuse to search the whole city. I don't believe he can hide. Haven reminded, we can't do it in the city. This is a secret operation. Let's keep an eye on him. Chapter 85. The name of Alaha the Tracker continued on his way and entered the city of Danis before dark. Haven was an experienced hunter. He actually found the hoof prints left by Aman and found Aman's horse not far from the north gate of Danis. Before entering the city, Aman had left his horse in the suburbs and entered the city directly on foot. He did not leave any identifiable footprints, completely cutting off all traces of him. The city of Danis was not very large, with a population of about 100,000 people living in the main city. Relatively speaking, it was not as prosperous as the Cape States. Most of the residents in the country made a living by farming and fishing. Aman found a good inn in the city and asked for the best room. After dinner, he closed the door and rested. He didn't wander around. Even on the way, he did not stop meditating every night. Whether it was fifth-level body arts or magic, he had reached the peak, but there was no sign of a breakthrough. Bear once said that the higher the level of the power of two sides, the more difficult it was. Not only did it require a strong will and perseverance, but it also required some luck and luck. Although it was not as difficult to break through from the fifth level to the sixth level of magic, it was still a very difficult threshold. Becoming a sixth-level mage meant that he could practice supreme magic. Naturally, it was not that easy. Fortunately, Aman was not in a hurry. He just did what was in front of him. According to the requirements of practicing the power of two sides, the next test he faced was breaking through the limit. This should be a test of body arts. According to Bear, the power awakened in the blood would cause a qualitative change in the body, like a refining of some kind of artifact. This process was naturally not easy. People must bear and break through their own limits, and they must clearly experience and understand all this. But no one would force themselves into an unbearable situation before breaking through. Even if it was by chance, they might get hurt or die if they did not do it properly. It sounded simple, but it was hard to know how to do it. That night, when Aman was meditating, he was extra vigilant. He activated detection magic and paid attention to the movements around the inn at all times. Just as night fell, there was a commotion on the street in front of the inn. Patrolling soldiers opened the door and checked the identity of all the guests. Any suspicious foreigners were taken away for questioning. From the conversation between the innkeeper and the captain of the soldiers, Aman learned that something had happened in the city today. A noble mage's belongings had been stolen. It was a very important magic artifact. The governor of the city had ordered a citywide search. Aman's room was also searched, but nothing was found. The cat snuck out the window, and anything suspicious was hidden in the bone. Aman conveniently hid the bone on the roof. Of course, they also had to search the person. Aman didn't say anything. He just produced a document, the one given to him by Mayor Dusty. Filling in the name would prove that the person was a citizen of the Empire of Igut. The document finally came in handy today. The name Aman wrote was Allah. Vitru was the one who did it. He found Jonah, the governor of the city of Danis, and claimed that he had returned to the city of Isis on the order of Lord Julian. When he entered the city, he had left several precious magic scrolls in the bag of one of his attendants. The scrolls had been accidentally stolen by a thief. These scrolls belonged to Lord Julian. They had to get them back. No one knew what Vitru had said to Jonah in private, so the search was carried out overnight. The soldiers didn't sleep in the middle of the night and had to knock on the doors of the city, which would offend the local residents. Of course, they complained, but the order had to be carried out. The owner of the shop gave the captain some benefits and asked him to be polite during the search. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to do business. The soldiers didn't make things difficult for Aman. After all, he was staying in the best room in the shop, and there was no problem with his ID. They only took a quick glance at him and left. The person they were looking for was a foreigner. This sudden night inspection of the entire city was not without results. Many thieves were caught. Even the city lord's concubine, who was having sex with a coachman in an inn, was caught on the bed by the patrolling soldiers. It could be considered an unexpected harvest. Many suspicious foreigners and young men who happened to pass by the city of Danis were taken out for questioning. Not everyone carried their ID with them. Unfortunately, Aman was nowhere to be found. They couldn't tell the public what they were looking for, and they couldn't go door to door to search for Aman. The city was quiet again after daybreak. What happened during the night made Aman even more vigilant. He had a feeling that he was the target of the search. So he packed up and left the city as soon as the sun rose. He left through the south gate of Danis. There was also a search at the gate. Aman took out the document with the name Allah on it and left the city without a hitch. A man was standing on the gate tower. It was Shoot, Aria's nephew. He felt that Aman's back looked familiar. He rubbed his eyes, but he couldn't be sure. When he came back to his senses, Aman was already far away. He had seen Aman in Vitru's tracking magic. But Aman had changed his clothes today, so it was difficult to recognize him in the crowd. When they failed to find Aman last night, Haven guessed that Aman would leave the city as soon as possible. Vitru came up with another plan. He assigned several men to guard the city gate. If they discovered Aman's whereabouts, they would immediately send a signal to their companions. After all, this matter couldn't be made public. They couldn't arrest Aman at the city gate. They had to follow Aman to a secluded place. By the time Vitru and Haven got the news, Aman was long gone. Haven had no choice but to continue searching for the clues left by Aman. He was really amazing. He actually found the branch in Aman's hand. If it was propped on the ground, it would leave a shallow circular hole. He had seen it several times on the trail leading to the wilderness outside the city. He continued to chase. There were no more traces left. Aman must have put away his staff. At the last trace, Vitru cast a tracking magic again. They saw Aman walking alone on a narrow path in the mountains. He seemed to be walking at a leisurely pace, but he was actually moving at a very fast speed. Vitru's eyes lit up. His eyes lit up. Haven looked at the mountain peak in front of him and said, "That man has entered the mountains. It's not too far. He just went around 2 mountains. But it's impossible to ride a horse, let alone take a carriage." Vitru and the other 3 warriors' faces darkened. They thought that it would be easy to catch Aman, but they didn't expect that it would be so difficult to catch up with him. Traversing the wilderness on foot was something they wouldn't normally do. But Aman wasn't going to follow them. They had no choice but to follow Lord Julian's order. Traversing the wilderness was the best way for Haven to show off his skills. Aman couldn't do it without leaving any traces. The footprints on the grass and the occasional broken twig were all clues to his whereabouts. Whenever Haven lost track of Aman, he wouldn't waste time looking for him. Vitru would cast a tracking magic next to the latest trace and pinpoint Aman's position. They would try to get there as fast as possible. Usually, their distance was shorter than Aman's. Since he couldn't see the target, it was much easier to run away than to chase after him. However, he couldn't get rid of Haven and Vitru at the same time. Haven was different from Aman, who was a fake hunter. He grew up as a real hunter in the mountains. He had learned all kinds of tracking and assassination skills in the Temple of Isis. He was very talented and diligent. Now he was only one step away from becoming a supreme warrior. Vitru was an excellent 6th-level mage. He had a precious artifact he got from the Temple of Isis, the Lamp of Death. With the help of the lamp, Vitru could detect Aman's position with the help of detection eyes and information tracking. Traversing the wilderness was different from walking on the main road. Although one could walk fast, the terrain was undulating and winding. Fortunately, these people didn't know how to fly. Unfortunately, there weren't many mountains to the south of the city of Tanais. If the terrain was like the Euphrates Valley, no one except Haven would be able to keep up with Aman. He would be able to shake off most pursuers. But the mountains and forests here weren't steep. Aman could only use the terrain to pick the most difficult path. His pursuers could still keep up with him. Haven was leading the way with a sharp dagger in his hand. He tried his best to choose the shortest and easiest route. Vitru, supported by 2 warriors, cursed Aman as they hurried on. How dare Aman make an honorable lord like him suffer like this? Playing hide-and-seek in the deep mountains and forests. Every once in a while, he would have to use the shadow-chasing lamp to cast powerful magic spells. What a tiring job. Ah! Haven comforted him, "Don't worry, Lord Vitru. There are advantages and disadvantages to traveling in the mountains. He won't be able to travel at night. But with the guidance of a mage like you, we can still catch up with him. We can take him down in one night." When everyone heard this, they perked up a little. They thought to themselves that the tracking was finally coming to an end. The wilderness was the best place to interrogate Amon. Before killing him, they had to torture this troublesome guy. They had suffered too much along the way. They hated Amon to the core. If Amon knew this kind of resentment, he would definitely find it funny. Just because these people wanted to kill him, he had to walk on the main road obediently and let them catch him comfortably. When it got dark, the tracker started to complain again. Amon didn't stop. He walked almost as fast as he did during the day. Haven was alarmed. He can see the road clearly in the dark. He didn't light a torch either. It seems that he has mastered detection magic. Lord Julian was right. He's a sorcerer. We can't underestimate him. So what if he's a sorcerer? Shoot said bitterly. We have Lord Vitru here. Even if he's learned magic, he'll still die. Vitru frowned. What we really need to be careful of are the scrolls in his hands. We can't let him have the chance to use them. We must cooperate with each other. If we can't, we'll use the scrolls first. Since he's a sorcerer, it won't be a problem to capture him. Even if we're exposed, we'll be able to explain ourselves later. Haven't reminded again, but Lord Julian said that the interrogation is very important. We can't leak it. We can't let this guy live. No one can prove that he's a sorcerer after we kill him. We have to do it in secret. At midnight, Amon finally stopped. He was tired and needed a rest, so he found a secluded place to meditate and practice the basics of magic. Vitru and the others also stopped. They couldn't keep up. Although they could use detection magic to survey the terrain in the dark, it wasn't very convenient. Vitru's physical strength wasn't as good as Amon's. Amon continued his journey before dawn. Haven and the others followed the trail in the depths of the mountains. It was like a strenuous procession. Maybe it was his intuition, or maybe it was because of Schrödinger's reminder. But Amon couldn't help but feel a sense of nervousness on his back every once in a while, as if someone was watching him closely. They walked for another 2 days. Their pursuers found Amon's campsite every night. He even made a fire to cook. It seemed that he was well prepared. Vitru and the others didn't have much rations with them. If they kept chasing, they would starve. Fortunately, the mountainous area wasn't too large. 2 days later, they arrived at a plain. Amon went back to the main road and entered a town. Vitru and the others were relieved. They followed Amon out of the forest and into the town. They learned that Amon had bought several horses and a carriage. He was driving the carriage himself. This time, they learned to be smart. They bought enough dry rations in the small town and bought 2 carriages with the best horses. Then, they drove the carriages and chased after them. Although the carriage was bumpy, it was much more comfortable than walking through the mountains. For the advanced warriors, it was also a kind of rest. To the south of the city of Danis was the city of Bubas. Amon went around the city without stopping and headed straight for the city of Heliopolis, further south. Along the way, except for a short campsite in the middle of the night, there was almost no rest at all, which made the pursuer very tired. Except for Haven, Vitru, and the other 3 warriors couldn't bear it. They thought to themselves, is Amon made of iron? Doesn't he get tired? In fact, Amon was also very tired. Unlike the pursuers, he couldn't take turns to rest and drive the carriage. He had been driving the carriage himself. The feeling of danger constantly reminded him of the existence of danger. He wanted to run away as soon as possible. But no matter how hard he tried, the feeling was always there. His physical and mental strength had almost reached their limit. If this continued, regardless of whether there were pursuers or not, and whether the pursuers could catch him or not, Amon would not be able to hold on and would collapse from exhaustion first. Realizing this, Amon also began to pay attention to conserving his stamina. He did not fly as recklessly as he did at the beginning. Even if something unexpected happened, he had to conserve his strength. At least he had a large number of scrolls to rely on. He had even escaped from the underworld. He should be able to get through this hurdle. The city of Heliopolis was located on the east bank of the Nile River. It faced Montefiore across the river. Heliopolis was the economic and cultural center of the Lower Igat. The nearby Nile River delta was rich in resources, developed in economy, and densely populated. Aman went around the city again and headed south. He left the carriage at the side of the road and entered the mountains on the east bank of the Nile River. Another chase through the mountains began. This time, Aman slowed down. He rested longer and longer every night. He purposely chose a desolate place. Before he entered the city of Tanais, Aman had already sensed that someone was following him. These pursuers were not simple. They had followed him all the way to the Nile River. It seemed that running away was not going to work. Before he was forced into a corner, he had to find a way to counterattack. He had to use the most scrolls in the mountains. That was the best choice. Aman had his own plans, and so did Vitru. When he was chasing Aman, he noticed that Aman had gone around the city and continued south. He couldn't help but ask Havan, "Where do you think he's going?" Havan thought for a moment. "He's going southwest, towards the Nile River." "Think about it. If he wants to escape from Lord Julian, where should he go?" "Montefiore." Vitru suddenly realized. Havan nodded with a gloomy face. "If I were him, I would run into Montefiore. It's both dangerous and safe. We don't know who sent him, and we don't know why Lord Julian wants to kill him. Once he enters Montefiore, it will be very difficult to kill him. Lord Julian can't hide everything from Montefiore." As the high priest of the Isis shrine, Aria's status was naturally high, but he could not do whatever he wanted in Memphis. At the very least, there were a few other people who were just as powerful as him. Aria did not have the final say in everything. If Aman entered Montefiore, it would be very difficult for him to carry out his plan secretly. If word got out, Julian wouldn't be able to control the situation. Vitru also thought of this. He narrowed his eyes. "It seems that this man's destination is Montefiore. We have to stop him before he crosses the river, but be careful of the scrolls in his hands." Be careful of the scrolls in his hands. It would be even better if someone else attacked first. Havan smiled fiercely. "It'll be easier if we know his destination. We can tell Aman to make the first move. We can follow Aman. He's slowed down. It looks like he can't hold on much longer. He's been trying to shake us off, but he failed. Obama will come here from the main road. He'll be much faster than Aman." Chapter 86. Kitten, Run. Havan and Vitru were superior to Aman in both body arts and magic. Moreover, they were more familiar with the situation in the Empire of Igat. Therefore, they were ahead of Aman. Most importantly, they had correctly guessed Aman's destination. Vitru didn't use the Shadow Soul lamp after entering the eastern bank of the Nile River. He didn't want to waste any more of his magic power. He only asked Havan to follow Aman's trail. The distance between them and Aman seemed to have widened. After 3 days of walking in the mountains, Aman gradually relaxed. He no longer felt like he was being watched. Schrödinger also slept soundly. It seemed that they had shaken off their pursuers. It had been a tiring journey, and he was almost forced into a dead end. Now, he could finally heave a sigh of relief. That night, Aman didn't hurry on with his journey. He cooked a delicious meal for Schrödinger and himself. He continued to meditate and practice the basics of magic. After midnight, he lay down and had a good sleep. Before he went to bed, he didn't forget to set up magic formations around him as a warning and a cover. Just before dawn, Schrödinger suddenly jumped up from the ground and shouted. Aman also woke up with a start. The feeling of being watched came back to him. He was startled. Did the pursuers not give up? Did they find us again? Amon packed up his things and put Schrödinger in his bag. The pursuers were terrifying. He couldn't waste any more time. He had to cross the Nile River as soon as possible. Amon ran through the forest with his staff in his hand. He had already taken out several scrolls from the bone and put them in his bag. In front of him was an open field. The foot of the mountain was on the left and right sides. In the middle was a valley. Once out of the valley, he would be close to the Nile River. Amon suddenly stopped in his tracks. He shouted coldly, "Who are you? How dare you follow me all the way here? It's time to show yourself." There was an ambush ahead, but it was discovered by Amon in time. The stalker who had been stalking him like a maggot had finally appeared. He calmed down and raised his branch-shaped staff with one hand. 2 mages wielding staffs and 4 warriors wielding bows and arrows walked out from behind the mountain ridges on both sides of the road. The mage on the left stared at Amon and said, "Boy, you can't escape from me after all. Give me the inheritance of my ancestor and I may spare your life." Amon's pupils contracted. He looked at the mage and said, "So it's you, Obama. No wonder you were chasing me. If I give you the inheritance of Master Nero, will you spare my life? Will you tell me what you have done in the future?" Obama didn't know what to say. It didn't matter if Amon gave Amon or scrolls or Amon. Now, as long as Amon was still alive, it was the evidence of his evil deeds. In that case, there was nothing to talk about. As long as Amon wasn't an idiot, he wouldn't hand over the inheritance. Obama's face turned red. "I am the patriarch of the Ramos family. You have stolen my ancestors' inheritance. If you give it back, I will let you die a quick death." As he spoke, he raised his staff. The 4 warriors beside him had already drawn their bows and aimed their arrows at Amon. At such a close distance, Amon had no way of dodging the crossbows and arrows of the warriors. Amon was slightly surprised when he saw Obama's staff. It was almost the same as the one he gave to Link. There were 7 parangons inlaid in a spiral shape on the staff. It seemed that this was a very expensive standard staff, or perhaps it was made by the same master craftsman as Link's staff. This kind of staff could greatly enhance the power of all kinds of divine spells, and there was no difference in the attributes. What he didn't know was that the staff in Obama's hand was Nero's personal staff, inherited by the patriarch of the Ramos family. The inheritance that Amon returned was the chief priest's staff of the city's shrine. It was even more precious than Nero's personal staff. At this time, another mage reminded, "Lord Ramos, be careful. He must have used detection magic to detect our ambush. He is a sorcerer." Obama was slightly startled, then he grinned, "A sorcerer? Then I won't need to kill him." Before he could finish his words, the people around him suddenly let out a cry of alarm. The sound of bowstrings being pulled was heard, and the warriors suddenly released their arrows towards Amon. Another mage waved his staff, casting a sea of fire on the open ground. It turned out that Amon had arched his body without warning and rushed towards Obama like a leopard, brandishing the tree branch in his hand. He never wasted time in a fight. The arrows shot by warriors were powerful enough to pierce the heart of an elephant. Amon was rushing forward in a straight line. There was no way he could dodge, but he didn't. At the moment when the bowstring vibrated, he reached into his clothes and took out a silver shield out of thin air. The shield was 7 feet high and 3 feet long, blocking the front of his body. The 4 arrows hit the shield, and a series of buzzing sounds exploded in the air, like a big hammer hitting a huge drum. The echoes were endless, but there was no sound of metal colliding. When the arrows hit the surface of the shield, a silver light burst out. The traces left by the arrows were like stones falling into a calm lake, creating a series of ripples. No one saw where Amon took out the shield. It turned out to be a defensive artifact enhanced by magic. Moreover, Amon could also use magic, which greatly enhanced the defensive effect of the shield. It was too late for the warriors to shoot a second arrow. The only thing that could stop Amon was the sea of fire in the open ground. The other mage's reaction was obviously not slow. He immediately cast a powerful advanced fire elemental magic. It was simple and effective, burning Amon to a crisp in an instant. But Amon was not burned. The arrows hit the shield, but he only slowed down a little. With a flick of his wrist, the silver light on the shield extended along the arc of the shield, forming a ball of light that wrapped Amon in the middle. Just like that, he rushed into the sea of fire. Tongues of fire lashed out at the light shield, making a sizzling sound, as if the light shield would crack at any moment. The silver light was instantly dyed red, and Amon was wrapped in blazing heat. Amon waved the branch in his hand. There seemed to be the sound of waves surging in the air. An icy blue trace spread out in front of him, like a wave rushing out of the sea of fire. This was the advanced water magic, Icebound. Amon did not use it to attack anyone. He just opened a path for himself in the sea of fire and rushed to Obama in the blink of an eye. When the sea of fire rose, Obama thought that Amon was dead, but he did not expect that the blue light flashed and the fire split. Amon was already in front of him. He held the shield in his left hand and swung the branch in his right. The position of priest was hereditary. Obama was the patriarch of the Ramos family and had inherited the position of priest of the Shrine of Cape. But he himself had been practicing magic for so many years, but he was only a third-level mage. Naturally, he could not become an oracle like Nero. But a third-level mage could already practice advanced magic, and the staff in his hand was very useful. In a crisis, it played its full potential. The wind and sand in front of Obama were swirling. In an instant, an earth wall harder than stone rose up and crashed towards Amon. It was an advanced earth magic, wall fortifying. It could be used for long-range defense and close-range counterattack. It was quite a good move. The shield collided with the earth wall, making a muffled sound like a faint thunder. Amon's rushing figure was abruptly stopped. At this moment, Obama saw a white light. It was the branch in Amon's hand. Covered with a faint layer of light, it passed through the defense of the earth wall. It was too late for him to react. The branch lightly swept across his neck. Obama's head turned at a strange angle and drooped down. No one expected Amon to take out a magic shield, nor did they expect him to be so skilled in magic. What's more, the inconspicuous branch in his hand was not only a staff but also a warrior's weapon. Although the process was complicated, from the moment Amon suddenly rushed forward to the moment Obama was killed on the spot, it only took a few blinks of an eye. Obama's body fell to the ground, and the wall fortifying collapsed. The rest of the people were stunned. The shocked warriors dropped their bows and unsheathed their swords, pouncing on Amon like madmen. They were all Amon's personal servants, but they could only watch as their master was killed. They didn't even have time to protect him. The other mage was called Gajue, a fourth-level mage and a close friend of Obama. He was invited to help this time, and it was said that he would get a lot of benefits after the success of the mission. Gajue thought it would be easy to deal with a hunter from the countryside, but he did not expect that Obama, the mastermind, would be killed as soon as they met. His eyes were filled with horror, and he frantically waved his staff as he retreated. Blades of wind danced around Amon, like countless tiny blades slicing at him. At the same time, there were all kinds of flashes of light, making Amon's body feel heavy and his reactions slow. The air became sticky, hindering all his movements so that the warriors could cut him into pieces. This was a reasonable way for mages to cooperate in a battle. Gajue was obviously very experienced. If the four warriors had formed a battle formation and fought with all their strength, they might have been able to fight Amon. But Amon suddenly rushed in front of Obama. In shock, they threw away their bows and pulled out their swords and rushed at him. In their panic, they attacked at different times. Although the interval between their attacks was short, it was enough for Amon to react separately. These people were all low-level warriors, 2 third-level warriors and 2 second-level warriors. Obama did not know Amon's strength, and he thought that this was like killing a chicken with a butcher's knife. Amon felt his body become heavy, but he wasn't affected much. The air around him seemed to have become sticky, hindering his movements. But he didn't move at all. The sword of the first warrior slashed at him, and Amon pushed the shield in his hand to meet it. The heavy shield hit the tip of the sword heavily. With another flash of silver light, the slender sword was abruptly broken. Amon turned his wrist and lifted the shield. The iron rod stretched out from below and hit the chest of the warrior. It seemed to be a light touch, but the light from the tip of the rod sank into the warrior's body. The warrior spat out blood and fell down, twitching. But Amon did not look at him. He turned around and waved his staff, making a sound of metal colliding. He blocked the sword of another warrior and swept the edge of the shield horizontally, like a huge battle axe chopping at the waist of the warrior. With a miserable cry, the warrior was not cut in two. Instead, his body was folded into a strange shape like a piece of paper and flew out. When he landed on the ground, he had lost his life. The other two warriors had just rushed in front of Amon. Seeing this scene, they were terrified and had lost the courage to fight Amon. But everything happened too fast, and they had no time to react. The swords in their hands were still stabbing at Amon. Amon swept his shield horizontally like a heavy iron door, continuously bouncing off the attacks of the two swords. He raised the staff in his left hand and waved it in the air. Two wind blades flew out in succession and cut the necks of the two warriors. The wind blades looked like soft kisses. In an instant, deep wounds appeared on the necks of the two warriors, and blood gushed out. The rain of blood did not fall on Amon, but was blocked by the light emitted by the shield. The two warriors also twitched and fell to the ground. Their bodies trembled violently like prawns suddenly thrown into a pot of boiling oil. Soon, they became motionless. The other person died even faster than the two warriors. Just as they fell to the ground, Amon suddenly threw the shield in his hand with all his might. The heavy shield spun like a frisbee, striking at the retreating mage with a sharp gust of wind. This was a precious weapon blessed by magic. It was obviously Amon's self-defense. No one expected him to suddenly throw it away in the middle of a battle. At the same time as he threw the shield, Amon raised his staff and a white light sprinkled down, eliminating the negative effects on his body. No matter how fast Amon retreated, he was not as fast as the shield. He was standing too close to Amon and could not retreat to a safe distance in a short time. He was only a 4th-level mage, and Amon's magic was much better than his. At the same time, he was also a 5th-level warrior. In a hurry, Amon only had time to raise his staff forward and cast an invisible shield out of thin air. The shield encountered an invisible barrier in the air, and a cracking sound came from an unknown place. Obviously, Amon was standing in the same place and did not touch anything. But as if he was hit by a sledgehammer, he flew out with a scream. After he landed, he knelt on the ground. Then he felt a heat between his eyebrows and the whole world disappeared in his eyes. It turned out that Amon had turned the branch and a flame flew out of the tip of his staff and hit Amon's forehead. The flame only left a scorch mark. Although Guju's body seemed to be intact, the scorching heat had already penetrated his brain and instantly killed him. Before they could finish a cup of wine, Obama and the others were dead, while Amon was unharmed. He did not use the scroll. For one thing, it was unnecessary. For another, he did not want to use the scroll left by Nero to kill Nero's family. A gust of wind blew, rustling the grass and trees in the mountains and blowing the clothes of the corpses. The bodies of the 6 people who were alive a moment ago gradually became cold. There was a sad look in Amon's eyes. He sighed softly, like the wind blowing through the treetops. He straightened his clothes and walked over to pick up the shield. But just after he took 2 steps, he suddenly stopped. He slightly bent one leg to maintain his forward posture. Then he slowly straightened his body. His face was tense and dignified, as if he was facing a great enemy. His hair was almost standing on end. Applause came from the wilderness. Someone said in a sarcastic tone, "Wonderful, wonderful. What an eye-opener. Amon, you accepted Nero's gift but killed the patriarch of the Ramos family. Do you still want to escape today? Lord Julian's vision is really good. He has long seen that you have an unspeakable secret. It turns out that you are a magician. Can you tell me, how can an advanced warrior use advanced magic? I am really curious. Maybe I can use this secret in exchange for your life." Looking up, there were 5 people coming out of the forest. Obviously, their momentum was completely different from the 6 people just now. Amon actually recognized one of them, and the rest looked somewhat familiar as well. He had seen Julian's follower, Vitru, in the Temple of Isis. He had also seen Lord Julian's bodyguards when he left the temple that day. Vitru was in the middle with a staff in his hand. Haven was in the front with a shield in one hand and a dagger in the other. 2 warriors were on either side of him with shields and long swords in their hands. Julian's nephew, Shoot, was behind Vitru with a battle-axe in his hand. They stood a few dozen paces away from Vitru. This distance was enough for warriors to charge, and also within the range of throwing weapons such as spears. It was also the best distance for mages to coordinate their attacks. Amon wanted to launch a surprise attack like he did with Obama and the others, but he didn't have the chance. Moreover, these people were emitting a strong aura. Amon was obviously not their match. Vitru looked at Amon like a cat looking at a mouse that it could toy with. No one could guess what a mouse's first reaction would be when it was stared at by a cat. Amon patted his leather bag and shouted, "Schrödinger, run." Amon knew that he was in trouble. He might not be able to protect Schrödinger any longer. He had to let the cat escape no matter what. He stood still with the staff in his hand. Suddenly, a cat jumped out of his bag and ran towards the entrance of the valley. It ran faster than a panicked cheetah. Schrödinger's claws fell on the grass without even making a sound. It disappeared in the blink of an eye. It was so loyal that it did not hesitate to run away. Vitru and the others weren't surprised. They already knew that Amon had a cat with him. They just stood there and didn't move. Amon didn't move either. They were here to catch a man, not a cat. Vitru laughed, "Amon, you're really in the mood to care about a cat at a time like this. Think about yourself. What do you think of my proposal?" Haven also shouted, "Please don't move, and don't try to pick up that shield. We can take your life at any time. No matter how good that shield is, it doesn't make any difference. You don't stand a chance anymore. Don't even think about how to escape. We know your whereabouts from Cape to here. You'd better think about how to cooperate with us, lest you suffer more." Chapter 87. A fight to the death. Vitru had asked Amon how he was able to use both advanced body arts and magic at the same time. Amon was so nervous that he didn't seem nervous at all. He bowed to Vitru and said, "Lord Vitru, I didn't expect to see you here. But it's no wonder. How could a bunch of losers like Obama catch up with me? I'm sure there's a master in your team who's good at tracking." Vitru and the others showed complacent expressions. Suddenly, they heard Haven's voice, "Be careful." But it was too late to be careful. Amon bowed and knelt on one knee as if he was saluting. His right hand loosened the staff on the ground, and he took out another silver shield out of thin air. He stuck it into the ground and used it as a shield to protect himself. Then, he waved his right hand and threw out several scrolls as if they were petals. Vitru and the others knew that Amon had scrolls with him. They had also mentioned that they had to be on guard against Amon. But in the end, they failed. No one had expected Amon to throw out the scrolls so easily. 3 high-grade scrolls and 1 mid-grade scroll. He didn't even blink. He was just speaking and saluting when he bowed. Amon had been studying the new scrolls along the way. He had discovered that none of the advanced scrolls were as advanced as the 2 he had used in the underworld. It was no wonder that Nero would deliberately use them as a reward. Those 3 scrolls were indeed the proudest works of his life. They were extraordinary. Even among the advanced scrolls, none of them were as advanced as the one he had used on the Euphrates River, the Song of Ice and Fire. These scrolls were all standard scrolls that could cast specific magic spells. With so many of them, it was already rare to find them. With Amon's current magical power, it was possible to control 1 high-grade magic at a time, but it was probably impossible to control 2 or 3 at the same time. But Amon, just like in the underworld, only unfolded the scroll to activate the magic and did not control it. The first scroll was called Dancing Wind Blade. It was a high-level magic that attacked indiscriminately in a large area. The wind in the valley was chaotic. Countless tiny air particles were condensed and compressed like sharp blades, flying in all directions in a disorderly manner. Wherever it passed, the trees and grass were turned into fragments, and smoke rose from the ground. The second advanced magic scroll was Space Fisher. It was also an advanced magic that attacked indiscriminately in a wide area. It was mixed with countless wind blades, distorting the space. Tiny cracks appeared in the air. The branches that were swept into the air were silently dislocated, as if they had been cut in half by some unknown force. The third high-level scroll was Frost Mist. A thick fog rose from the forest, and tiny ice crystals spread out in all directions, like needles that couldn't be seen with the naked eye. Its attack power was not very great, but it had a very good effect of blocking line of sight and interfering with detection, making it difficult for people to find Amon's position, and it was difficult to tell from which direction these attacks came from. The changing wind blades were mixed with the sudden appearance of space cracks. Covered by the frost mist, it was difficult for people to detect them. This was a trick Amon had figured out long ago. He believed that using these 3 scrolls at the same time could achieve the best damage. Moreover, they were the most unexpected and difficult to defend against. Amon unfolded the scrolls and no longer controlled them. This meant that he was also under the attack of the scrolls. But he was prepared. He knelt on the ground and used his heavy shield to block most of the attacks from the front and the top. A light shield rose along the curved surface of the shield and completely protected him. At the same time, Amon quickly picked up the staff on the ground and raised it up. The dust in front of him condensed into a thick and solid wall. This was the advanced magic wall fortification. Obama had just used it, but Amon was much more skillful than him. Even if Vitru knew that Amon could use scrolls, he didn't expect that Amon would use so many advanced magic scrolls at the same time. And he didn't expect that Amon would also put himself under the attack of the scrolls. He didn't care about money, but he also didn't care about his own life. He was willing to spend a huge sum of money to cut people down. Vitru and the others also had scrolls with them, but they didn't use them right away. On one hand, they didn't need them to deal with Amon. On the other hand, they were Lord Julian's magic scrolls. It would be best if they didn't use them. The scrolls that Amon threw out were equivalent to a vast and luxurious manor on fire. Herds of cattle, servants, beautiful women, luxurious clothes, and gold and silver were all turned into mist, blades of wind, and fissures. Amon didn't control the power of the 3 advanced magic scrolls. Instead, he controlled another advanced magic scroll and aimed it at Vitru. He didn't want this brilliant mage to launch a desperate counterattack. At the same time, he didn't want Vitru to have a chance to use the scroll on him. Therefore, he decided to temporarily stop Vitru's attack. This advanced magic scroll didn't cause any damage. It could only temporarily confine the target in a certain space. Amon had used it on the Euphrates River to deal with the serpent monster. Later, Gilgamesh compensated him with a similar scroll. Now, he threw it out again. Vitru sensed that the space around him had been constricted. He seemed to have been cut off from the battlefield. In fact, Amon was worrying too much. Vitru didn't have a chance to counterattack. His first choice was to defend himself. Vitru cried out in surprise. He waved his staff. The shields in the hands of the warriors on both sides of him and Haven glowed with a silver light. The light formed a huge light shield, protecting the entire formation. Vitru waved his staff again and a set of transparent armor appeared around his body. The armor glowed with a dark brown light and wrapped around the mage's body. Even his eyes couldn't see through the armor. This was the most advanced defensive magic of the air element. Instant shield. When using this magic, the mage couldn't even move, let alone be constricted by the spatial shackles. Haven's posture was almost the same as Amon's. He was kneeling on one knee and holding a round shield in front of him. In front of the shield, there was also a circle of bright light. The circle of light was small, but it was just enough to protect Haven. Haven had also undergone the second awakening of his power. He had mastered a low-level auxiliary magic. His combat skills were quite good. The shield in his hand was also enchanted by magic. It was a strange battle. Everyone on the battlefield was clenching their teeth and struggling. They were like fragile sandcastles that could be crushed at any moment in a gale. Vitru unfurled the scroll. The divine spell didn't last long. The spatial confinement of the intermediate scroll had been shattered by the combined power of the other three scrolls. Vitru didn't even need to cast a spell to dispel it. However, the scroll killed one of them. Due to the interference of spatial shackles, Vitru's divine barrier failed to protect Shoot, who was standing behind him. The nephew of Lord Aria was the first to fall to the ground. A fatal wound appeared on Shoot's forehead. The deep crack in the air almost split his head in half. Countless wind blades left numerous wounds on his body. Shoot died a wrongful death. He was standing in the safest and least vulnerable position, but he didn't expect Amon to launch such an attack. When the crack disappeared, the wind blades dispersed, and the mist still lingered in the air. The most powerful attack was finally over. The seemingly sturdy earth wall in front of Amon had long been smashed into pieces, and the silver light barrier had also shattered and disappeared. Only the giant shield was still intact, protecting his body. The clothes on Amon's right shoulder blade and left thigh were torn. Blood was flowing out, as if they had been cut by a sharp knife. The situation on the other side was even worse. Shoot was dead, and the two warriors beside Vitru were lying on the ground with serious injuries. It was hard to tell which was the most fatal wound. The warrior on the left was still holding his sword in his right hand, but his left arm, which was holding the shield, had been separated from his body. The warrior on the right had several deep wounds on his waist. Blood had dyed half of his body red. Only two of the opponents were still fighting, Vitru, who was standing, and Haven, who was half kneeling. The clothes on Haven's shoulder were also torn. Blood was seeping out of his right shoulder. The shield in his hand was still flickering with a dim light, but the surface of the shield had already cracked. Although it was a good magic shield, it couldn't compare to the shield in Amon's hand. The items Amon had collected in the secret cave were still intact after the battle against Bear. Although today's battle was fierce, it couldn't be compared to Bear's. No one could have imagined that Amon could not only take out the first shield, but also the second one out of thin air. How could he have so many treasures? The shield should have been taken out from a spatial artifact. Even if Amon had a spatial artifact, he wouldn't be able to open it. For example, he wouldn't be able to open Nero's spatial ring. No matter how hard he thought about it, he couldn't figure it out, and he didn't have the time to think about it. Vitru was the only one unharmed on the battlefield. The transparent armor covering his body was slowly disappearing. The mage's face was ghastly pale. After chasing Amon for so many days, Vitru's stamina and energy had been greatly depleted. Vitru was exhausted as well. If Amon had been a supreme mage, he would have been able to control the direction of the three scrolls instead of firing them randomly. Vitru probably wouldn't have been able to stand. Amon didn't give his opponent any chance to catch his breath. He threw away his shield and grabbed his staff. His half-kneeling body suddenly sprang up from the ground. He staggered a few steps when he landed, but he immediately steadied himself and rushed forward without hesitation. His stamina and magic power had been consumed to the limit. Although the shield was good for self-defense, it was too heavy and would affect his speed and reflexes. He threw it away without hesitation. He couldn't give Vitru another chance to use powerful magic. Amon had no energy left to defend himself. Haven reacted quickly. He sprang up from the ground like a leopard and rushed towards Amon with his sword and shield in hand. There were only a few dozen paces between them. He saw Amon take out something from his robe and throw it forward. Thinking that it was another scroll, Haven squatted down and raised his shield to defend himself. However, he didn't feel any explosion of magic. Vitru was also frightened. He didn't have time to launch a counterattack. The parangan on his staff glowed brightly and created another shield. However, the thing in Amon's hand didn't fly out. It was just a long bone. Instead, all kinds of weapons, armors, staffs, parangons, scrolls, rations, wine bottles, a new set of clothes, an old set of clothes, and 2 pairs of shoes flew out. Amon gathered as much energy as he could and swung the bone with all his might. An invisible space opened up, and the things he carried with him flew out. Vitru's magic shield could resist energy attacks, as well as weapons. However, there was a limit to its power. He didn't expect that Amon would throw a hill at him. How could a man throw so many things out of the air with just a wave of his hand? Vitru was scared out of his wits. He saw the flying scrolls in a golden, translucent parangan. It was the god's tear that so many people dreamed of. The god's tear pierced through Vitru's magic shield and hit him in the face. Although the damage was negligible, Vitru couldn't stay calm anymore. His soul flew out of his body. Countless things fell on his magic shield. Vitru's knees buckled and he fell to the ground. Then, the shield shattered and the things fell on him. A spear pierced through his back. The 2 heavily wounded warriors beside Vitru were also hit by the mountain of debris. Heavy axes, spears, sharp swords and sabers were the first things to fall to the ground. The 2 warriors died on the spot. It was hard to tell whether they were killed by the weapons or by the heavy objects. They were seriously injured and couldn't bear such a blow. The scrolls and the parangons scattered on the ground, covering the corpses of the 3 warriors. Amon didn't have time to look at the result of the attack. Haven had jumped up from the ground and was already in front of him. The machete in his hand was shining with a bright light. The machete was short, but the area it covered was astonishing. Amon waved his staff and blocked the machete with a faint light. The sound of the collision was deafening. Amon was knocked back 2 steps. When he landed on the ground, his wound was bleeding again. Amon's staff was much heavier than Haven's machete, but Haven's strength was astonishing. When the machete hit the staff, Amon's internal organs were almost shattered. Haven's martial arts were obviously superior to Amon's. The bone in Amon's left hand fell to the ground. He held the staff with both hands and tried to stop Haven's second machete. Then, he was knocked back 2 steps. The wound on Haven's right shoulder started to bleed even more. He switched the machete to his left hand and grabbed the shield with his right. Amon took advantage of the pause and shouted. He swung his staff at Haven with both hands. The sound was like a hammer hitting a broken gong. Haven blocked the staff with his shield and swung his machete horizontally. Suddenly, Amon felt a strange twisting sensation. When his staff hit the shield, it was pulled to the side by a force, almost causing him to lose his balance. He hurriedly dodged to the side, but Haven's blade had already cut through his clothes and left a deep wound on his ribs. Blood gushed out instantly. This man actually knew magic, a simple low-level magic that could be used to support martial arts in battle. If Amon's reaction had been a little slower, he would have been cut open by now. Haven was a true fighter and hunter. He didn't even look back to see how Vitru was doing. He just attacked with all his might. Haven had consumed more energy than Amon when he used the defense scroll. He was injured as well. But now, he was gritting his teeth and fighting to see who would fall first. It was Amon's first time meeting an opponent like this. It was a battle of life and death between warriors. Haven's attacks were precise and reasonable. Amon didn't have many opportunities to counterattack. He could only wave his staff and retreat. The continuous impact made him feel weak and dizzy. Blood trickled down from the corner of his mouth. Amon's martial arts weren't very good, but his movements were quick and practical. He could always block the fatal attacks with his staff. Every counterattack was blocked by Haven's shield. The dagger in Haven's hand was more flexible than his staff. Its range of attack was also greater than Amon's staff. When Haven made his move, Vitru and the others didn't cooperate with him. Haven's heart sank. He guessed that all his companions had died. However, he gritted his teeth and didn't look back. His eyes were bloodshot. Under such circumstances, Haven's only option was to defeat Amon. Otherwise, he would die even if he managed to escape. Amon was forced to retreat to the edge of the forest at the foot of the mountain. Behind him was a steep cliff. He couldn't hold on any longer. He discovered Haven's weak point. The wound on his shoulder was very deep. Every time he blocked Amon's counterattack with his shield, his face would contort in pain. The dagger in Haven's left hand gradually dimmed. He was running out of energy. But Amon was in a more dangerous situation. His arms were numb and his body was trembling. He almost lost control of the staff in his hand. Amon had nowhere to retreat. He used his remaining energy to block the dagger and launched a counterattack. The staff hit the shield with an ear-piercing cracking sound. The shield finally couldn't withstand such a long fight and broke into several pieces. Haven's body trembled. He threw away the broken shield and let out a painful roar. He took half a step back and pounced at Amon with his dagger in hand. The dim dagger suddenly shone brighter than ever. This was Haven's final attack. It seemed that he wanted to end the battle with a single slash. Amon's staff was pulled forward by an invisible force. His body was pulled half a step forward. It seemed that he couldn't block the attack in time. Haven had once again used his divine incantation. This was the last bit of energy he had accumulated. Chapter 88. At some point, a layer of ice had formed on the ground in front of Amon. The drifting mist had not completely dissipated yet, and there was a layer of white mist on the ground covering the layer of ice. The surface of the ice had ripples flowing with the mist, as if it was in a half-melted state, making it even more difficult to detect. Haven would have been able to keep his balance on the ice under normal circumstances, but he was already at the end of his rope. He slipped and fell. But he reacted quickly. Even though he could not control his body, he did not give up. The dagger in his hands was still shining brightly, and he swept it towards Amon's waist. Amon arched his body and pushed his staff forward, just in time to block the blade. The blade's aura shattered, and the blade slid along the staff. The tip of the blade had already pierced into Amon's chest. If it had gone in an inch further, it would have pierced through his heart and killed Amon. But the battle just happened to end at that moment. Amon swung his staff down and hit the back of Haven's head. The warrior did not even have the chance to make a sound before he died. His dagger flew out of his hand, and his upper body fell on Amon's leg. Amon was thrown to the ground, and he could not get up for a long time. After a long time, Amon struggled to sit up and threw Haven's body aside. The wounds on his shoulders, chest, waist, and thighs were no longer bleeding, but the pain was excruciating. In the life and death battle just now, he had won with the help of magic. His remaining magic power was so weak that he could only cast the simplest magic with his staff. Freezing a layer of ice on the ground was the first magic that Crazy Ol had taught Amon. It was how he had subdued Maki, and today, it was the same trick that saved his life. Amon was so tired that he could not even stand up. He did not care about the corpses and the scattered things. He just sat quietly and closed his eyes to rest. His heavy breathing gradually calmed down. Schrödinger was nowhere to be found. Amon sat there until it was dark. He did not open his eyes, nor did he move. As soon as he relaxed between life and death, he was so exhausted that he didn't even want to move. When the sky was completely dark, Amon stretched out a hand and held the staff vertically in front of him. A soft white light quietly sprinkled on his body. This was a healing magic that he had used most of the day to recondense the magic power he had cast. The wound that was no longer bleeding was slowly healing, but the pain and the injuries in his body were not healed. He put down the staff weakly and began to meditate and practice the divine incantation that he had been practicing every night. While Amon was fighting Vitru and the others, Arya, who was far away in straits, couldn't help but break into a cold sweat. The high priest of the shrine of Isis had just read Nero's personal notes and found the one mentioned in Nero's last words. Only then did he realize that the scroll Nero left behind was the legendary Tiamat's wrath. The reason why it was called a legend was because it was almost impossible to make. Only a few people had actually seen it. It was a high-level scroll that could be used by anyone who had mastered advanced magic. However, the Tiamat's wrath was different from other scrolls. The user's life had to be sacrificed in order to activate it, and its power could not be controlled. It took Nero a few years and countless years of painstaking effort to continuously condense magic power before he succeeded. It was a challenge to prove himself that he had finally reached the pinnacle of scroll-making. Once activated, the Tiamat's wrath would not only burn the user's life, but also destroy all life within its range. It was said that even the gods would be severely injured. Julian thought of a possibility. If Amon was not telling the truth, and the 3 scrolls that Nero had left for him were still in his hands, then the Tiamat's wrath would be his last resort when his life was in danger. If Amon really used the scroll, he would be dead for sure. Vitru, Haven, and the others would not be able to come back either. If that was the case, then this mission was not worth it. Julian didn't know how to explain the disappearance of the captain and his followers. Julian could only pray to the gods that Amon didn't use the scroll. Either he wasn't a sorcerer, or Vitru and the others didn't give him the chance to use the scroll. Julian suddenly realized that even if Amon was a sorcerer, it was impossible for him to be an advanced sorcerer. Her worries were unnecessary. She laughed at herself and wiped the cold sweat off her forehead. While Arya, who was in the Sepet Cape, was breaking out in a cold sweat, on a large ship in the Nile River, a young girl also had a surprised look on her face. The luxurious ship was made of cedar wood. The bow and stern of the ship looked like a crescent moon. The hull of the ship was painted a beautiful pale gold, and its surface was engraved with the divine script of Igut, as well as all kinds of complicated magic formations. Apart from the ship below the deck, the ship on the deck was 3 stories high. It was luxuriously decorated, mysterious, and solemn. It was the ship of the adoratress of the Temple of Isis, who ruled the shrine of Igut and represented Pharaoh's authority over Igut. The adoratress of the Temple of Isis was presided over by the adoratress of the Nile River twice a year on behalf of Pharaoh. This ceremony was actually a ceremony in which herds of cattle and sheep were thrown into the Nile River to feed the crocodiles. It symbolized the sacrifice to the god of Igut, Osiris, the protector of the Nile River. The adoratress was only there to preside over the ceremony. The priests would lead the people to the river and throw the cattle and sheep into the river. Groups of crocodiles would swim over and fight for the food, tearing at the cattle and sheep with their sharp teeth. This terrifying scene caused the tens of thousands of people to inexplicably feel a deep sense of reverence for the gods in the depths of their hearts. Maria was sitting on a high platform far away from the shore with a staff in her hand and a golden crown on her head. She had no expression on her face. She did not want to see the scene by the river. She just prayed to the goddess Isis in her heart. If it was a few years ago, this delicate and pure girl would never have dreamed that she would be presiding over such a ceremony. But now, as the adoratress of the Temple of Isis, she had no choice but to give everything to the gods. After the ceremony, the adoratress boarded the ship and left the shore. She was going to inspect the Nile River on behalf of the goddess Isis. Tens of thousands of people were still kneeling on the shore, worshipping the adoratress ship until it disappeared into the horizon. The ship flowed along the river. Maria sat on the balcony on the third floor of the ship, looking at the mighty water and thinking about something. Gabriel stood beside her with a sword hanging from his waist. On both sides of the deck below, the attendants of the adoratress were sprinkling various prepared offerings into the river. The offerings were made of dough and sheep fat, symbolizing the legend of Osiris slaying the monsters and protecting the people of Igut. At this moment, the god's tear inlaid on the adoratress' staff suddenly emitted a golden light that shone on Maria's face. Gabriel's black armor also reflected a faint golden light. Gabriel was slightly startled and asked in a low voice, "Your Excellency, what are you doing?" Maria frowned slightly and said, "I didn't do anything, nor did I cast any magic." This is the god's tear's response. It actually affected my magic power. Gabriel asked in confusion, "What's going on? How can the god's tear's response be so spontaneous? I've been with you for so long, but I've never seen anything like this." The god's tear's golden light only lasted for a moment, and then it returned to normal. Maria looked at the staff and said thoughtfully, "I've never seen it either, but it's recorded in the ancient books that this is the guidance and summon of the gods, symbolizing some kind of prophecy. The gods or the emissaries of the gods are coming." Gabriel was surprised. "Your Excellency, you are so calm. How can you be so calm when such a legendary miracle has happened?" Maria smiled slightly. "My supreme warrior, as the adoratress of the guardian gods, you should not be confused or surprised by a miracle. My inner shock is beyond your imagination, but I have learned how to not show it. Just now, I really felt something, as if there was a silent summon somewhere." It had been more than 2 years since they left the town of Duk. Maria was now 18 years old. Her body was more mature than before, but her facial features had not changed much. She could still be recognized at a glance. She was the adoratress of the shrine of Isis, and there was an indescribable sense of solemnity around her. She was now the adoratress of the shrine of Isis, and there was an indescribable sense of solemnity around her. Her eyes were clear and calm, with silent compassion. Under her gaze, people felt that they were being watched by the gods, and they often felt ashamed of their inferiority. This was a change in her temperament, and also a change in her heart. There was always the shadow of the young echo in her eyes, but not everyone could see it. Gabriel asked again, "Where did the summon come from?" Maria stretched out her hand and pointed downstream, "It's in the distance." Maria did not know that the god's tear on her staff suddenly shone with a golden light. At the same time, Ammon swung the bone with all his might. The god's tear pierced through the magic barrier and hit Vitru in the face. What Ammon didn't know was that Maria was riding a boat along the Nile River, gradually approaching the place where he was. The next morning, at dawn, Ammon finally stood up with his staff in hand. He heard a buzzing sound. Many flies fluttered their wings and landed on the wounded corpses. 2 stray dogs were tearing Obama's body apart. Alarmed by Ammon, they ran back into the forest. Ammon looked at Havan's corpse in front of him and sighed. The warrior had almost killed him, but in the end, he died at his hands. Havan was the most formidable and respectable opponent Ammon had ever met. But he did not know his name. If Havan had not attacked Ammon at the last moment, he could have escaped. Maybe he thought that Ammon was no match for him, or maybe he had no choice but to complete the mission. But in the end, Havan died. Ammon did not want to let the stray dogs eat his body. He waved his staff and a fireball fell. The flames spread and engulfed Havan's body, burning him to ashes. Ammon thought for a moment and decided to cremate all the corpses. He had already killed all of them. There was no need to leave their corpses exposed in the wilderness. Besides, Ammon did not want to leave any traces of the battle behind. Before burning the corpses, Ammon did not forget to search for their belongings. His belongings were scattered among the corpses. Needless to say, there were some parangons, coins, weapons, and staffs. The most valuable staff was, of course, Obama's. Vitru's wasn't half bad either. Aman found 2 scrolls on Vitru's body. He also found a scroll in the ashes of Haven's body. But the most important things were 2, both from Vitru's bosom. The first object was a parangan inlaid with a magic formation at the base. It looked like a delicate lamp. Aman recognized it. Crazy Ol had taught him how to make all kinds of magic artifacts, and one of them mentioned the shadow-chasing lamp. It would have been very difficult for Aman to collect the materials himself, and he would have failed many times before he could make it. But today, he had found a precious product. He knew how to use this artifact. Only now did he understand why he had never been able to shake off his pursuers. The second item was a letter sealed in a leather case. It had been sealed with magic. If the person who received the letter could not open the magic circle on the envelope, the letter inside would be destroyed when the envelope was opened. Naturally, nothing would be seen. But this did not trouble Aman. He opened the letter in one piece. The content of the letter was written in the hieroglyph of Igut. Ordinary people would not be able to understand it. But Aman could read it. The letter was written by Julian to Burke, another high priest of the Temple of Isis. Aman gasped when he read it. The letter mentioned people he was familiar with, the adoratress Maria and the supreme warrior Gabriel. There were also secrets he had never heard of before. Julian conspired with Bork to get the adoratress to issue a new order to transfer him back to Memphis from the City of Straits under the pretext of an emergency. The letter also mentioned Gabriel. The adoratress was young and ignorant, and Gabriel helped her a lot. They should find a way to transfer Gabriel away from the temple so that she would never have a chance to come back. Julian recommended Haven, the captain of her guards. She said that this warrior was likely to be promoted to a supreme warrior and could take over Gabriel's position. Aman only knew that Iko had become the adoratress of the Temple of Isis. But now he knew that the high priest of the Temple of Isis had other selfish motives. It seemed that he was not willing to give up his full strength. He just wanted the adoratress to be a symbolic puppet. He even had the intention to murder Gabriel. It seemed that Gabriel was now the most valued assistant of the adoratress. The assistant of the adoratress should have been the high priest. Presumably, Iko's life would not be very comfortable. Aman watched for a long time. He had just gotten rid of the threat of death, but he was worried about Icho again. Anyway, his destination was Montefiore. He must find a way to give this letter to Iko so that she could be prepared and take precautions. In Aman's mind, although Iko Maria had become the adoratress of the Temple of Isis, for him, she would always be a weak and pure girl. Aman did not know why he wanted to go to Montefiore. Was it to see the famous capital of Igut on his way to the mainland? Only now did he suddenly understand, it was because of Iko. When he walked out of the mountains and faced a strange and unknown world, his first stop was to go to the kingdom of Babylon to find Madanzo. His second stop was to go to the Cape States to return Nero's staff. His third stop was to go to the land that he was worried about. Iko was in Montefiore. Although she was the adoratress, Aman had to see her in person before he could feel at ease, even if he could only see her from afar. Seeing this letter, Aman realized that he had come to the right place. Could it be that there was really a call and guidance from the gods? Aman carefully put away the letter and all the things that he wanted to take with him into the bone. Then he set fire to the body and the relics. He also changed into a new set of clothes given by Tasyang and threw the blood-stained and torn old clothes into the fire. The fire wrapped in thick smoke and rose up. Everything that had happened here was gone with the wind. After only one night's rest, Aman was far from recovered. He almost could not pick up the bone from the ground. It took him a lot of effort to put it into the inside pocket of his clothes and hide it close to his ribs. Aman even put the iron branch staff back into the bone. He broke a real branch in his hand and staggered out of the valley. When the sun rose above the treetops, he finally came to the running Nile River. He walked along the river upstream to the south. The nearest ferry was in that direction, and it was still a long way to go. The sun was not very hot, but Aman gradually sweated. His whole body was covered with cold sweat, and his breathing became faster and faster until he was gasping for breath. He felt dizzy, nauseous, weak, and dark. There were always stars flashing in his eyes. His steps were getting heavier and heavier, and he could not even lift his feet. With every step he took, the footprints on the river became longer and longer. He could only stand with the help of a tree branch. Aman had felt this before. The last time was before he met Abel and Cain in the outskirts of Uruk. That was because he had overused his magic power. But this time, he had not only used his magic power, but also his stamina and energy had exceeded the limits of what he could bear. Coupled with the injury and blood loss, he could not hold on any longer. The short rest last night did not help him recover. It only suppressed his injuries. He knew very well that he had to find a place with people as soon as possible. Otherwise, he would only die if he fainted in the wilderness without any ability to protect himself. That was why Aman had forced himself to clean up the battlefield and walk to the ferry as soon as the sun rose. But the injury happened to act up again at this time, and it was unusually fierce and unexpected. Not knowing how far the ferry was, there was not a single person in sight. The desolate riverbank seemed to be endless and endless. A stubborn and lonely figure of a young man slowly walked by, his footsteps getting heavier and heavier. With every step he took, the branch in his hand would sink deeper into the mud. Finally, there was a crack. The branch broke, and he fell to the ground. Aman tried his best to get up, but in the end, he could only turn over and lie on his back on the river. Even his eyelids became as heavy as 2 mountains. When he finally opened his eyes, they were greeted by the sunlight. The light in front of him was dazzling. It was as if there were countless transparent mosquitoes flying around. The soil under him seemed to emit a strange smell, and he was in a trance. Chapter 89. Could it be heaven? Aman shouted in his heart, "Don't fall down, don't lose consciousness, the beasts in the mountains and the crocodiles in the river will eat you. I haven't reached Montefiore, I haven't seen Eco, I haven't solved the secret of the gods, I haven't guided my people back to their homeland," but the strong sense of dizziness was beyond his control. Although Aman's eyes were open, the sunlight in front of him gradually dimmed. A cat came out of the forest on the high slope and quickly ran to Aman's side. It scratched his face with its claws and meowed anxiously, but he did not respond. In fact, Aman could hear the cat's meowing, as if it came from far, far away. The blurred vision in front of him seemed to become clear again. He saw Schrödinger, but it was not the Schrödinger that was meowing on the river bank, but the cat that he had seen when he was a child in Duk. Aman saw his own childhood. From the moment he was born, those happy and sad times flashed in front of him. All the people he loved and hated came back to him along with the past. In the myth of Igut, a person's life was like the flowing Nile River, and at the end of it was the underworld ruled by Osiris. Osiris would send a crescent-shaped ship to pick up the noble souls, and when the servant of Osiris, the goddess Batet in the form of a cat, appeared beside the corpse, the soul of the dead would be resurrected in the underworld and enter another world. Was the legend true? Osiris's ribs were in Aman's arms, and a cat was meowing anxiously beside him. At this moment, a ship came from upstream of the Nile River. When it first appeared, it was very small, just a black dot on the horizon, but as it gradually approached, it could be seen that it was a luxurious crescent-shaped ship. On the high deck, there were 2 people, one sitting and the other standing. Maria suddenly asked, "Do you hear anything?" Gabriel replied, "The sound of running water, the sound of the wind blowing through the forest, and a cat meowing in the distance on the east bank." "Maria, order the ship to sail closer to the east coast." Both of them had extraordinary eyesight. They saw Schrödinger and Aman lying on the ground from afar. Maria's expression suddenly became a little strange, as if it had triggered a long and deep memory. She murmured, "Gabriel, I think that cat's pattern is very familiar." Gabriel said, "Familiar? There are many cats around the temple of Isis. Cats are the animals that we, the people of Igut, worship." Maria explained, "Do you still remember? 2 years ago, when I first got the god's tear, I was startled by a cat one night." With her reminder, Gabriel also remembered. He muttered, "I still remember that cat. I don't know how it snuck into your room. It was dirty and fat, sleeping soundly. This cat is different. It's much cleaner and more beautiful. I don't think it's the same cat." Maria sighed inexplicably. People's lives change, and so do cats. "I remember that cat's pattern. It's almost exactly the same as this cat's. Order the ship to dock and go over to see what happened to that man. It's rare to see a cat so concerned about its owner." The experience in Duk had been a long time ago, but for some reason, Maria could still remember those few days very clearly. It was as if they were deeply imprinted in her mind. She could recall every scene, and she could even remember the patterns on Schrodinger's body. The ship had a very deep draft, so it could not approach the shoals on the shore, so it had to dock far away. Gabriel jumped down from the top of the ship. With a light touch of her toes on the deck, the bow of the ship dipped slightly. She took advantage of the momentum and jumped onto the shore. Her body was extremely agile. Gabriel walked to Ammon with his sword. He lowered his head and asked, "Poor and loyal cat, your voice is so anxious. Is this your master? What has happened to him?" The warrior walked over majestically. Even a lion would retreat because of her imposing manner. But Schrödinger did not run away. He just squatted on the ground and looked up at her. Gabriel couldn't help but feel a little funny. She was talking to a cat, and the cat could not answer her question. So she lowered her head and used the puppet eye spell to scan Ammon's body. Then she turned back and shouted, "Your Excellency, this man has no scars on his body, but he has suffered a very serious injury. His strength and energy have been greatly consumed. He is in a state of exhaustion. His life force is fading away, but he is not dead yet." Before his voice trailed off, a faint golden halo appeared above Ammon. From the halo, a white mist of light sprinkled down on his body, like a quietly flowing milk waterfall. This was the blessing of Isis, a blessing magic that could only be performed by the adoratress with the god's tear. It could not only heal injuries, but also eliminate pain, wash away fatigue, restore physical strength, and give people confidence, strength, and courage. In short, it was equivalent to a magic that could eliminate any negative effects. The first time Maria used this magic was in the Saya Desert, south of Duk, 2 years ago. The caravan was attacked and Gabriel was injured in the fierce battle. Maria suddenly used this magic. It was the simplest and most profound magic. At that time, Maria's power was still very weak, and the blessing of Isis was only a symbol. But now the situation was very different. Maria used a supreme magic, and it was only for Ammon. Not long ago, she had just become a 6th-level mage. In just 2 years, her achievements were amazing. The milky white curtain of light fell from the golden halo on Ammon's body. Looking at Maria, he didn't know when she had gotten off the boat. Holding the adoratress' staff, she stepped on the muddy water of the Nile River and walked over. It was difficult for a 6th-level mage to control air and water magic so exquisitely at the same time without the help of scrolls or other artifacts. She was like a goddess who walked on the waves. But Maria's staff was probably the best in the world, so it was not surprising that she could do this. When the servants saw the adoratress walking on the waves, they all saluted her on the deck. Gabriel asked in surprise, "Your Excellency, why did you come ashore in person?" She stopped a few steps away from Ammon and said, "I want to see the man's condition. He seems to have been through a fierce battle, and all his strength is exhausted. He is also seriously injured, beyond the limit of what his body and mind can bear. It is dangerous for him to faint in the wild like this. I can wake him up. Ask him what happened. Aman lay there, memories of the past flashing before his eyes. A hazy golden light appeared in his eyes. He felt very comfortable. His consciousness seemed to have left his body, or his body seemed to be his consciousness, as if he was floating in the clouds. It felt like his mother's gentle touch when he was a child. It was a memory that was too long ago and almost forgotten. He saw Aristotle, Gabriel and Eco Maria again. When he returned to the courtyard in Duk, his eyes were fixed on Eco's figure. He looked at her. The girl in front of him was particularly hazy, but it was getting clearer and clearer. She seemed to have grown up, with a mysterious and mature noble temperament. The scene around him was no longer the courtyard in Duk, but the wilderness beside the Nile River. She was wearing a luxurious dress, holding a staff and a golden crown. Aman was looking straight into her eyes. Aman woke up, but he did not realize that he had woken up. He was still in a trance. He looked at Maria and seemed to be talking to himself. Eco, is that you? You look so beautiful, just as I imagined. I finally see you. Am I already dead? How can I see you here? This is not the gloomy underworld. Is this another home for souls? This. Where exactly is this place? What should I call it? If I can give it a name, can it be heaven? Gabriel frowned and said, My lord, what is he talking about? This man is still not very awake. He must have mistaken me for someone else. When she heard Aman say the name Eco, her delicate body trembled slightly. The usually calm adoratress rarely lost her composure like this. Fortunately, Gabriel was staring at Aman and did not notice it. At this moment, Maria recognized who was lying on the ground. Although Aman's appearance had changed a lot, his facial features still had the shadow of that young boy. The pattern of the cat beside him was so familiar. How could it be someone else? More importantly, he called her by her pet name. Maria thought that no one in this world would call her that. Maria remembered that when she was in the room in the small building in Duk, she secretly wrote a line on the wall, Aman, my name is Eco. Then she erased it. How could he find it? Was it because she did not wipe it clean enough and left a mark? But this doubt was soon diluted by another surprise. Aman was still alive. Maria naturally heard about the flood. It was said that the whole town of Duk was destroyed by the flood. No one survived, so Aman should be dead. She heard the news not long after she officially became the adoratress. She shed tears in secret. That was the first and only time she shed tears in the temple of Isis, as if she was saying goodbye to the past. But Maria always felt that Aman was not dead, and should not be dead. Maybe this feeling was just a wish in her heart. She did not expect to see Aman again today. After saying these words, Aman fainted again. Maria did not hide anything from Gabriel. She calmed down and said as calmly as possible, I know him. You should know him too. He is Aman, the one who mined the god's tear in Duk. Do you remember him? Gabriel was stunned. It really looks like him. No, it is him. He has grown up. But I can recognize him as soon as you remind me. This cat has lost a lot of weight. He is still alive. He is really blessed by the gods. But why is he here today? What happened to him? Maria turned around and did not look at Aman again. She sighed softly and said, the ancient records are right. He was the one who mined the god's tear and made me the adoratress. I met him today. It was really the call and guidance of the gods. This man is very important. We should save him and protect him. We can't leave him here. His life is not in danger anymore. Take him away. We can interrogate him when he wakes up. When Aman woke up again, he found himself lying on a boat. Schrödinger was squatting beside him. In the noon sun, there was a faint golden light shining on him. The dizziness and nausea gradually disappeared, and so did the pain in his body. Of course, he knew that this was a kind of brilliant magic. There should be a mage who was saving him at the cost of his magic. Aman was not in danger anymore, but he was still very weak. He needed a good rest to recover. He raised his head with difficulty and looked around. He found that this small boat had no sails or oars. It was being pulled by an invisible force and was following behind a magnificent ship, breaking through the waves. A warrior was standing at the stern of the ship. She was a very beautiful woman, but at first sight, she gave Aman a sense of awe-inspiring majesty. Aman was a little confused. "Lord Gabriel, why do I see you? Where is this place?" Gabriel smiled faintly. "You know me. It's really you. Aman, I still remember your voice. I don't know why you fainted on the shore. It was the adoratress who saved you. She ordered me to bring you back." "The adoratress? Oh, I just saw her. So it was she who saved me, Lord Gabriel. I came from Cape States and was attacked in the forest." Aman finally woke up and understood what had just happened. He struggled to sit up and speak. Gabriel's voice was not loud, but it was very majestic. He stopped him. "Don't move or speak. The adoratress ship is in front of us. The adoratress is using magic to save you. Please lie down and keep your mind calm. If you have anything to say, you can say it when I ask you." Aman lay down obediently. He felt a strange warmth in his heart. The scorching sun and breeze on the Nile River became gentle and warm. Everything was peaceful and tranquil. He finally relaxed completely. He was no longer afraid and worried. He did not expect to be reunited with Eco Maria in such a way. Not only did she quietly heal him, but she also sent her most valued supreme warrior to escort him. Aman's heart was full of gratitude. Adult men were not allowed to touch the adoratress, including her daily necessities. Therefore, Aman could not board Maria's ship. Maria ordered people to put down a small boat and asked Gabriel to escort Aman. Gabriel looked at Aman. He was a little surprised. The adoratress actually sent her to escort Aman alone. It showed how much importance she attached to him. Maria sat on the big boat. She had been casting blessing magic to heal Aman's wounds from a distance. However, none of the other attendants noticed. This was an unimaginable gift for ordinary people. However, Aman seemed to be qualified to receive this kind of treatment. The god's tear that the adoratress used to activate the magic was extracted by him. Gabriel thought quietly in her heart. She looked at Aman without saying a word. Her task was both to protect and escort Aman. It was impossible to let him go before she found out what had happened to him. In the afternoon, the ship docked. There was still a long way to go back to Montefiore. They rested in a town halfway. The adoratress lived in the shrine. Aman did not have to worry about anything. There were comfortable carriages to transport him. When they arrived in the town, they arranged a quiet courtyard for him. Several very clean slaves served him dinner. After dinner, Gabriel came and sent away all the slaves. Only she and Aman were in the courtyard. Aman knelt down and saluted. Thank you, adoratress. Thank you for saving me." Gabriel waved her hand. "Aman, get up and talk. The adoratress is the symbol of the blessing of the Egyptian people on behalf of the goddess Isis. It is not surprising that she would save you. However, we did not expect that it would be you. The adoratress asked me to ask what happened to you. If it was someone else, Aman might not be willing to tell the truth about his experience. However, Maria sent Gabriel to ask. Aman did not want to hide too much. He was alone for so long. He had carried so many heavy past events. He had no one to talk to. Finally, he could talk about it. Although they had only known each other for a short time, when they reunited, Maria and Gabriel saved him. Aman had an inexplicable sense of trust in them. Aman told her about his experience. After Maria and Gabriel left Duk, he was exiled to the mountains because he offered the gods tear without permission. However, he happened to escape the disastrous flood. He stayed in the tribe of the cavemen for more than a year. He happened to see Nero's last words and relics. Later, he walked out of the mountains and went to the kingdom of Babylon. Recently, he came to the Cape States of the Empire of Igut. He returned Nero's relics to the shrine and received a generous gift for himself. He left the Cape States for Montefiore with the gift. However, he was chased by two groups of people. After a fierce battle, the robbers were all killed, and he struggled to walk to the ferry, but he finally couldn't hold on any longer and fainted halfway. That was what had happened. His experiences in the past 2 years were too complicated. Amon only gave a brief summary of some things, including Crazy Ol Bear's past, and his experience with Murin. It was not because he didn't trust Gabriel. He couldn't tell Gabriel that he was a sorcerer and had seen Bear's last words. These things could not be mentioned. Otherwise, it would only bring trouble to himself and others. As for how he obtained Nero's relics, it was the same as what he said in the Shrine of Cape. Then, Amon took out a leather envelope and handed it to Amon. He said, Lord Vitru, the priest of the Temple of Isis, was one of the pursuers. I found this on his body. It looks like a confidential letter. It might be very important. Please give it to the adoratress. I know you are worthy of my respect and trust. The letter had been processed with magic. After opening it, Amon sealed it with the same method. This was also the method of processing magic artifacts. The first artifact Amon made in his life was this envelope. Chapter 90. How are you doing? Gabriel didn't finish his question. There were still many doubts in his mind, but he felt that this letter was very important. He hurried back to the shrine in town to report to Maria. She wasn't worried that Amon would run away. He couldn't go anywhere in his current condition, not to mention that the courtyard was under strict surveillance. In Maria's bedroom, the adoratress opened the letter in front of Gabriel. As she read, her expression became more and more serious. Her fair face seemed to be covered with a layer of frost. She didn't speak for a long time. Gabriel asked anxiously, Your Excellency, you don't look well. What's written in the letter? Maria handed the letter to him and said, Read it yourself. Please stay calm and don't act rashly. Reading the letter, Gabriel couldn't help but feel angry. He subconsciously grasped the hilt of his sword and cursed, What a despicable man. He wants to transfer me out of the Temple of Isis just because he's greedy for that ridiculous position. Your Excellency, your decision was wise. The Temple of Isis doesn't need a high priest like Julian. He should be the one who doesn't need to come back. Maria comforted him, You and I both know what kind of man Julian is and what he's thinking. Amon's appearance is like the guidance of God. With him and this letter, Julian will never be able to return to the Temple of Isis. Vitru is dead. Thank God, Amon is still alive. As long as we copy this letter and send it to Julian, he won't be able to disobey the next order of the Temple of Isis. Gabriel nodded, Use message magic to copy this letter and send it to Burke. Tell him that this is a letter from Julian. I don't think Burke will be able to help Julian, let alone stop you from appointing another high priest who is more pious and faithful. Maria said, Okay, it's decided then. You can do it yourself. Amon is very important. We can't let him get hurt again. Gabriel glanced at the adoratress and asked tentatively, From what you're saying, you want to pardon Amon? A foreign civilian killed a senior priest of the Temple of Isis, but no one will investigate it, and no one will ever mention it again? Maria looked up at Gabriel and asked calmly, Isn't it supposed to be like this? Amon was innocent. He did not harm anyone. On the contrary, his noble and selfless character symbolized the call of God. Back then, he had offered the gods tear and received the blessing of goddess Isis. He received Nero's staff, but he did not take it for himself. Instead, he returned it to the Cape States. You should know very well what this letter means, but he still trusted me and handed it over. Is there a reason to hurt such a person? Gabriel couldn't help but bow his head. Saintess, you are right, of course I understand this. But I have seen too many noble people do shameful things, such as Lord Julian. It is because I have witnessed too much evil in the world, and Hua took the black tail, that I am more determined to believe in and protect the glory of God. If it falls into the hands of other lords, Amon's life will be in danger if he hands over this letter. I am just worried about him. Maria said, I think so too, so I decided to protect Amon. Gabriel said, I want to ask one more thing, why do you think so too? Your position is different from mine. You should understand that what Amon knows is related to the scandal of the temple of Isis, which may bring shame to God or the temple. Maria smiled faintly. Shameful people can only humiliate themselves. As the saintess of goddess Isis, I protect the dignity and glory of God. Whether in the sun or in the dark, I will not do anything that will bring shame to the gods. That is true faith. Gabriel bowed and said, You are indeed the saintess, your eyes symbolized the pity of the goddess. I want to confess to you, I was just wondering if Amon knows the contents of this letter, and I was thinking about what to do if he knew. Maria looked at the envelope on the table and said, The envelope does not seem to have been touched, and the content is written in Igut, he should not know what is written in it. In fact, even if he has seen it, what can he do? It is not his fault that the letter fell into his hands. The content of the letter is very important to us, we should thank him. Gabriel, I want to ask him myself. Gabriel thought for a moment and said, You saved him, so he should thank you. I will arrange for him to be summoned by the saintess tomorrow morning. This is a small town, not the temple of Isis, everything is more convenient. When the saintess was patrolling the Nile River, she saved a passerby who had fainted and ordered someone to bring him to the small town. Early the next morning, the rescued person expressed his respect and gratitude to the saintess. It was a great honor for the merciful saintess to summon him. Under the guidance of the servant, Amon waited outside the temple. After the saintess finished her breakfast, the saintess summoned him. The location was the ceremonial hall of the temple, which was also the place where the saintess temporarily handled official business. A blanket had been laid on the ground, so Amon couldn't get too close to it. He bowed to the adoratress on the blanket according to the prescribed etiquette. His knees and elbows were on the ground, and he lowered his head to kiss the ground. The saintess sat there and beckoned him to stand up. She said calmly, I didn't expect it to be you, the person who mined the god's tear in Duk. Now we meet again at the Nile River. This is the guidance of the gods. Servants, bring Mr. Amon a chair and invite him to sit down. The servants were all surprised. Commoners were not qualified to sit in front of the saintess, unless they had a special reason to receive a special gift. It was this young man who mined the god's tear. The saintess did not hide this fact and confessed that she had known Amon for a long time. Everyone looked at Amon in surprise. After sitting down, Amon bowed and replied politely, I used to be a miner. Mining parangons was my duty. It was the gods who gave the god's tear to the saintess through me. Today, it was the saintess who saved me. I don't know how to express my gratitude. I didn't expect it to be you, said Maria. Yes, I didn't expect it to be you either, said Amon. If there was anything special about this meeting, it was that Amon had been looking straight into the eyes of the saintess the whole time, just like when they were in Duk. He looked at her and sighed silently in his heart. He knew that there was a world of difference between the two of them. Staring into her eyes was perhaps the only thing he could do. He could only bury the budding youth feelings deep in his heart. Since Iko could recognize him, she must still remember the accidental hug and touch. He almost kissed her. This was a past that could never be told. Iko did not vent her anger on him because of this. She also buried this common secret in her heart. Otherwise, Amon would not be sitting here in one piece. It was a simple question and answer. The two of them said almost the same thing, and only they could understand it. The saintess waved her hand, her posture indescribably elegant and noble. She smiled and said, Mr. Amon, you not only mined and offered the gods tear, but I also heard that not long ago, you returned the staff of the Oracle of Cape States, along with a large number of precious relics. How noble and selfless you are. I saved you because of the call and guidance of the gods. You should thank Goddess Isis for watching over you. Next, the saintess asked Amon about how he obtained Nero's relics. Because it might be related to the secret past of a supreme mage, she ordered all the servants to leave, leaving only Gabriel by her side. Amon had already told her about the experience twice in the Shrine of Cape. This time, he was just repeating it. Then he told her about his encounter in Cape States. Maria asked, You are an advanced 5th level warrior, but as far as I know, Vitru is a 6th level mage. Julian's personal guards are also advanced warriors. How could you kill them all? Amon's heart tightened. He could not avoid this critical question. He could not repeat the whole battle, because that would expose all his secrets. However, Maria did not wait for him to answer. She continued, The patriarch of the Ramos family did not thank you for your kindness. He also brought mages and warriors to hunt you down. 2 groups of murderers appeared for the same purpose, but they could not expose themselves. I think they fought each other and both sides were badly injured. That's how you got the chance to survive. Is that right? God, is there a more perfect answer than this? When Maria asked him if that was the case, she was actually answering the question for him. Amon had been thinking of such an explanation all along. Now he did not have to waste his breath. He nodded and said, The saintess is wise and farsighted. That's right. Gabriel interrupted, Can you describe the faces of the people around Vitru in detail? Amon described the faces and weapons of the warriors. Gabriel turned around and said, Saintess, among them was Julian's nephew, Shoot, and the captain of his personal guards, Haven. Haven was a very powerful man. He was very likely to become a supreme warrior. I didn't expect him to die. Maria said with a regretful look, Mr. Amon, I would like to apologize to you on behalf of the Temple of Isis. It is very likely that High Priest Julian was behind this. But everyone is dead, and there is no concrete evidence to prove that he did it. According to the laws of Igut, civilians are not allowed to accuse a supreme mage directly. All accusations must be made by another noble who knows the inside story, and then the Supreme Magistrate's Court will decide. Since everyone is dead, I'm afraid that no noble who knows the inside story will be able to accuse you on your behalf. Even if the Supreme Magistrate's Court of Igut goes to trial, Julian won't be punished. Making this public will put you in a very bad position. But please rest assured, I won't let this happen in vain. I will expel Julian from the Temple of Isis, because he offended the dignity of the gods. Amon stood up and bowed deeply. Your Excellency, how can you be the one apologizing to me? I understand what you're saying. You're the one who saved me and protected me. Maria waved her hand again, Amon, please sit down and talk. Then she pointed at Gabriel, You gave us a secret letter and admitted that you got it from Vitru's body. You should know that a foreigner could put his life in danger. Why do you trust Lord Gabriel and me so much? Amon smiled bitterly, There are many unknown dangers in this world. You don't know when and where they will appear. But you have to trust some people. If there is no one you can trust, then what's the point of living in this world? Maria's calm expression finally changed. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but in the end she didn't. At this time, Gabriel asked again, Amon, can you read? If Amon didn't know how to read, how could he understand Nero's last words? And Maria should know that Amon not only knew how to write, but he also knew Igut's cursive script. Otherwise, how could he know the name Giko? Amon answered honestly, My lord, I can read. He didn't explain which language he knew. Gabriel asked again, Do you know hieroglyphs? Amon replied respectfully, With my status, I shouldn't know hieroglyphs. No one will teach me. Gabriel stopped asking. Maria changed the topic. Gabriel, can you leave the room for a moment? I have something to ask Amon alone. Gabriel was stunned, but he immediately obeyed and left the room, standing guard outside with his sword. It seemed inappropriate to leave a grown man alone with the Saintess, but Gabriel knew that there wouldn't be any problems. He trusted Maria more than he trusted himself. What if Amon was an assassin? There was no need to worry about this. Not to mention that Amon was so weak that he could barely walk. Even if a supreme mage suddenly attacked, Maria would be able to resist with the Saintess's staff and other magic artifacts. When only Maria and Amon were left in the room, both of them were silent, not knowing what to say for a while. The question just now didn't mention the contents of the secret letter. Amon didn't ask what was written in it, and Maria didn't ask if Amon had read it. They both deliberately avoided the topic. After a long time, Maria asked first, Amon, how do you know my name is Iko? I heard you call me like this at the Nile River. Is it just a coincidence? How should he answer? Should he tell Maria that it was a great sorcerer who used message magic to record what she had written? Amon finally lowered his head and no longer looked directly into her eyes. He slowly replied, Your Excellency, you once wrote this name on a wall in Duk. Everything that happens in this world always leaves a trace. Whether people know it or not, it has happened. Please forgive me for calling you that. Maria didn't get angry. She also looked down at her fingers and said, Amon, you can't call me that anymore. I no longer use this name. Amon raised his head again and said, Yes, Your Excellency, I will not call you that anymore. But is it blasphemy for me to call you that name in my heart? Please forgive me for my rudeness, but this is the truth. What a bold and presumptuous remark to say in front of the adoratress. Maria was stunned. She didn't dare to look up at his eyes. She replied in a low voice, When we look up to the gods, we see the starry sky above our heads and the honest heart. Amon, the gods won't blame you, so how can I? Amon sighed silently, Thank you for your answer, Your Excellency. Someone once said something similar to me. Maria raised her eyes, Who? Amon, his name is Aesop. He was a slave of a merchant in Montefiore. He told me this in Cape States. Maria twisted her fingers together and sighed softly, The nobility of the soul does not differ because of one's identity. Amon, if you want to call me Iko, you can call me that today. But after you leave this door, please remember what I said just now. Then the two were silent again. It seemed that they didn't know what to say. After a while, Amon finally asked, Iko, how are you doing? Maria asked in reply, Amon, you know that I am already the adoratress of the Temple of Isis. Why do you ask? Amon lowered his eyes and looked at his toes. He replied weakly, Yes, I know that you are already the adoratress. But I also know that you should have a loyal and upright high priest around you, but they are not what people imagine. I think you have your difficulties, so I want to ask you if you are happy. Maria smiled, as if it was the innocent smile of the young girl back then. I have just said that when I look up to the gods, I see the stars in the sky and an honest heart. I am the adoratress of the goddess of Isis. What I guard is the holy faith. There is evil and darkness in the world, and that is the reason why I am more determined. Under the protection of the light in my heart, I am living a good life. It should not be described as happy or not, it is my glory and honor. Iko did not hide anything from Amon. His special ability could feel the true emotions in her heart. At this moment, Amon completely understood her words. He looked at her and already knew that this adoratress would become a supreme mage sooner or later. The integration of faith was a difficult test for others, but with her state of mind, it was just an inevitable process. Amon already knew that Icho had achieved the 6th level of magic. It had only been 2 years since she started practicing magic, but she had already reached the 6th level. The speed of Amon's advancement was quite amazing, but so far he had only achieved the 5th level of the power of 2 sides. Although this power was more difficult to practice, he started much earlier than Maria. Crazy Ol had laid the foundation for him several years ago. Chapter 91. I'll give you a chance. Becoming a supreme mage was only a matter of time for Maria. As long as she accumulated enough practice, she would be able to do so. Thinking of this, Amon couldn't help but look at her staff and asked, Iko, are you already a 6th level mage? Maria nodded, yes, many people want me to become a supreme mage as soon as possible so that I can truly be the adoratress. In the past 2 years, I have devoted most of my energy to practicing magic. This is all thanks to you. You were the one who mined the god's tear and gave me the best staff. For some reason, Amon suddenly said, the staff of the adoratress is extremely rare, but I have an idea and suggestion, am I right? Maria said, go ahead. Amon said, the staff makes you stronger, it is a symbol, but it does not mean that you are more noble and holy. People are just people. I heard that a great mage can perform all kinds of magic without the help of a staff. This is real practice and accumulation. Only in trials and battles will one pick up a staff to become more proficient. A foreign warrior actually had the intention of giving advice to the adoratress on the practice of magic. If there were others present, they would have loudly reprimanded Amon for his rudeness. Maria, however, did not blame him at all. She said with slight surprise, your suggestion is very reasonable. I'm just wondering, how did you understand this? Amon said, I have been to many places and experienced many things in the past 2 years. Someone told me this, but I don't know if it is correct. Maria looked at him, thinking about something. Suddenly, she asked, Amon, do you also want to learn magic? Amon replied, with my status, I am not qualified to learn magic. Maria smiled again, in just 2 years, you are already a 5th level warrior. If you can become a supreme warrior in the future and pledge loyalty to the goddess Isis and the empire of Igut, you can naturally obtain the status of a noble. At that time, you will be able to perform the second awakening of your power, and you will be able to learn auxiliary divine arts, just like Gabriel. I'd love to have the opportunity to hold this ceremony for you. I've checked the records of Duk and learned some things. You're a miner who can mine the god's tear, so you should have no problem passing this ceremony. The identity of a supreme warrior was completely different from that of an ordinary warrior. They had already entered the ranks of the top warriors on the continent. No matter which country it was, they would be granted the noble status of a supreme warrior who pledged allegiance to them. Crazy Ol had warned Amon not to reveal his identity as a sorcerer. Everything would be fine when he became a supreme sorcerer. And today, Maria had inadvertently pointed out another way. Becoming a supreme warrior and obtaining the status of a noble could also hide many secrets. However, Amon was more interested in something else. He leaned forward and asked, the records of Duk. May I ask what it says? Maria's eyes showed a rare hint of cunning. As the adoratress, of course I can't tell you the records of the Temple of Isis, but I can give you a chance to see it for yourself. If you become a supreme warrior and obtain the status of a noble, learn hieroglyphs, and are also a supreme warrior of the Temple of Isis, you will be allowed to enter the archives. I'll tell you where to find it. By then, you will know many secrets about your hometown. Duk is an unusual place. From her tone, it seemed that she wanted to suggest that Amon stay in the Temple of Isis. Her words aroused Amon's great interest. Amon was a little tempted, but then he thought of his mission and promise. He asked sadly, Iko, will I have such a chance? It's so difficult to become a supreme warrior. I don't know if I can afford to wait. Maria looked at him. The light in her eyes seemed to be a kind of silent comfort. She said softly, Amon, your hometown is no longer there. Do you have a place to go? What are your plans? Amon looked into her eyes again, I want to find the survivors of Duk and guide them back to their hometown. But it's still a swamp. I don't know when the flood will recede. I don't have a place to go at the moment. I plan to go there in a year's time to see if there's any fertile land. Maria said, then listen to my advice. Become a warrior of the Temple of Isis. That's the only way to protect yourself. Vitru and Haven died without knowing why. If you continue to act alone, some people will definitely come after you. This is the most powerful counterattack and the best protection. If you want to go back to your hometown, I can send you there to carry out a mission. What do you think? The adoratress' words were like an order. Recruiting a warrior for the Temple of Isis was supposed to be a supreme honor. But now, she was talking to Amon in a negotiating tone. Amon couldn't refuse. He really had nowhere to go. He had agreed to meet Madanzo in Link's tribe in a year's time. There was still a long time. He had just killed Vitru and his companions. Traveling alone was full of danger. Maria's advice was the best choice for him. Amon looked at her. His heart was filled with gratitude. Today, he finally called her Iko. He couldn't help but think of the night in Duk. He held her in his arms. Their bodies were so close. His left hand was around her waist, and his right hand was on her soft chest. It was as if she had been melted by some kind of heat. Her breath had scorched him. They were attracted to each other in the heat. She had trembled in his arms, and his hands had held her breasts through her thin pajamas. He could even clearly feel the protruding texture of her breasts in his palms, filled with the sweetest temptation in the world. But when Amon lowered his head to kiss her, he was suddenly pushed away. Everything ended at that moment. Amon suddenly had an impulse. He wanted to stand up and walk over to Iko. He wanted to lift her up from her seat and put her staff aside. He wanted to kiss her without anything between them. But it was just a delusion. Amon couldn't do that. He didn't even dare to show the slightest trace of his desire. Instead, his expression became even more solemn. Gabriel stood outside the door for a long time. He didn't move an inch. There was no impatience on his face. Finally, he heard the adoratress summon him through message magic. Gabriel, come in. Tell the servants to come in as well. When the servants of the adoratress returned to the council hall, Maria directly gave an order. With the blessing of the goddess of Isis, Amon mined the god's tear. Although he used to be a citizen of the Hittite kingdom, he had been recognized by the goddess. This time he came to Igut to return the staff and relics of the Oracle of Cape States, Nero. His noble and selfless conduct was worthy of praise. His hometown had been destroyed by the flood. Igut was his new home. He was specially promoted to be an honorary warrior of the Temple of Isis to protect the dignity of the goddess. Gabriel said, Amon, I congratulate you. Quickly thank the goddess and the adoratress. Amon realized that he could no longer call Maria Iko. When Gabriel walked in, he opened one door and closed another. It would be difficult for him to be alone with the adoratress again. He quickly got up from his seat and thanked Maria. Gabriel said, Amon, you are a 5th-level warrior. If you are good at fighting, you can be directly under my command. Amon replied, in fact, I prefer to be engaged in a quiet and peaceful job. The adoratress sat there with her staff in her hand. Amon, think about it first. It will be as you wish. This is a reward for your noble conduct. Lord Julian, who stayed in the Cape States, had lost weight recently. He could not eat well or sleep well. Faal Judah, who was in charge of his daily life, was very worried. He was afraid that he would offend Lord Julian if he did not take good care of him. Rod Dick, the governor of the city, visited him many times. Perhaps Lord Julian was not used to the climate and environment here, but an 8th-level supreme mage should not be so fragile. Alas, who could understand Julian's pain? He sent Vitru and Haven to pursue Amon. He thought that the mission would be easy, but there was no news for many days. Did they fail? How could it be? Even if they failed, they should have returned to report. Even his nephew, Shoot, had disappeared without a trace. It was as if he had disappeared from the world. More than a month later, an emissary from the Temple of Isis arrived in Cape. The emissary gave him a secret letter in private, but didn't say anything. He opened the letter. There was no title or signature, but the content was exactly the same as the one he had given to Vitru to deliver to Burke. What was even more frightening was that the emissary was sent by the adoratress. Did Vitru and the others fail and get captured? Did the adoratress send Amon to the Cape States? Julian had deliberately arranged for this to happen before he arrived in the Cape States. It was a trap, but he had stepped into it. Julian broke out in a cold sweat when he read the letter. However, shocking things happened one after another. A few days later, he received another message from High Priest Burke. The content was very simple. There was only one sentence: "Don't contact me privately anymore." It seemed that Vitru and the secret letter had fallen into the adoratress' hands. Amon was just a bait. Gabriel must have captured Vitru along the way. As long as he handed the secret letter to Burke, the adoratress would know that the adoratress already knew about it. The high priest would be eager to disassociate himself from Julian. Some things were not meant to be exposed to the light of day. Aria's worries soon became reality, and within a few days, the Shrine of Isis sent an official messenger to deliver the latest order of the adoratress. Before the order was issued, it had already been approved by the Pharaoh of Egypt. Aria was officially appointed as the deputy chief priest of the Shrine of Cape and the chief high priest. This order was different from what Rod Dick had expected. The adoratress had appointed Julian not as the oracle, but as the deputy oracle. Rod Dick would still be the oracle, which was tantamount to demoting Julian. It was obviously a very severe punishment. However, the wording of the order was very interesting. No one knew which scribe wrote it. The scribe praised Julian, praising him for his many years of hard work as the high priest. He also praised him for his humility and the fact that he had taken the initiative to ask for a transfer. He swore to guard the border cities for the empire, even if he was just an ordinary priest. After coming to the Cape States, Julian swore to the gods and volunteered to stay here to assist Lord Drick to guard the border cities that the empire might face in the future. The adoratress and the assembly of priests of the Temple of Isis were moved by his spirit and finally gave their approval. The last paragraph of the order was interesting. Julian was ordered to stay in the Cape States forever, to live and die with the glory of the empire. The gods were watching, and the light of Horus was with him. This was a slap in the face on one side. However, Julian could only swallow the slap. To issue such an order, the adoratress had to get the support of the other two high priests. Under such circumstances, she reported it to the pharaoh, and the pharaoh had no reason not to approve it. Being a high priest was just a position that many people wanted. In the Temple of Isis, in addition to Julian, there were several honorary high priests who were also supreme mages. Rod Dick was overjoyed when he received the order. Things were going better than he had expected. Julian would guard the Cape States and be under his control. Although the status of a supreme mage was not lower than that of a governor, his position was still only that of a deputy chief priest. He secretly guessed that the adoratress must have something on Julian. No wonder the supreme mage had lost weight recently. The adoratress' order was publicly announced in the Shrine of Cape States. Rod Dick and Julian stood side by side to receive the order. After the official order was read, the messenger conveyed a message to Lord Drick. Amon, who had returned Nero's staff and relics not long ago, received the adoratress' personal praise and was now an honorary warrior of the Temple of Isis. This was also the glory of the Cape States. Coincidentally, both the adoratress and Lord Gabriel knew this warrior. He used to be a miner in the town of Duk in the territory of the Hittite kingdom that had submitted to Igut. 2 years ago, he had personally mined the god's tear and presented it to the goddess Isis. The adoratress asked the messenger to ask Lord Drick if he still remembered this. Of course, he remembered. How could Rod Dick say that he didn't remember? The Lord Drick had prepared a generous gift for the messenger and asked the messenger to bring a generous gift back to Montefiore and deliver it to the warrior Amon. The adoratress' message was for Rod Dick, but it made Julian break out in a cold sweat. Amon was not dead yet. The adoratress had personally appointed him as an honorary warrior of the Temple of Isis. This meant that Vitru, Haven, and the others were definitely not coming back. Julian hoped that they were already dead. Otherwise, they would be a great threat to her. Unfortunately, there was no news of them. The Temple of Isis occupied almost half of the city of Montefiore. It was the center of divine power in the lower Igut and the symbol of the divine rule. The Nile River was the mother river of the Igut. Every year, there would be a dry season and a rainy season. The regular floods not only enabled the people of the Igut to master the calendar, but also brought large tracts of fertile land for irrigation. The Egyptian Empire had two main territories, Lower Egypt in the Nile Triangle and Upper Egypt in the upper reaches. The capital of the Upper Igut was in Thebes, while the capital of the Lower Igut was in Montefiore. Between them was a desolate desert. There were a few smaller cities along the Nile River. A long time ago, the Upper Igut and the Lower Igut were two separate kingdoms. According to legend, the first pharaoh of the Empire of Igut, Horus, unified the Upper Igut and became the protector of the empire. The Nile River had a northerly wind blowing from the sea all year round. As long as the sails were raised, the ships could go up to Upper Egypt with the wind, and when the sails were lowered, they could go downstream to Lower Egypt. Shipping was very convenient. The king of the Igut was Horus, and the main shrine of each city was the Temple of Horus. However, the most important shrine of the Lower Igut was the Temple of Isis. In the middle of the main hall of the Temple of Isis, there was a statue of the goddess Isis holding the baby Horus. Isis held Horus in her arms with one hand and supported his back with the other. She looked like she was breastfeeding or comforting Horus to sleep. This was the most famous statue in Lower Egypt. Isis's eyes were full of love, but also with a hint of pity. It was as if she was looking at Horus in her arms, but also as if she was looking at all the subjects of Egypt. When Amon came to the Temple of Isis, he said that he wanted to do a quiet and peaceful job. The adoratress did not put him in the warrior guard under Gabriel's command. His job was really quiet, guarding the archives. The archives was a collection of historical records and magic books. No one would go there to cause trouble. There was no need to guard the gate. The main duty of the warriors on duty was to maintain order in the archives. In fact, there was nothing much to maintain, so it was quite easy. But this place was very important. Because the books were very precious, there were warriors on duty every day. In addition to supervising the slaves, they also had to guard against fire and theft. If ordinary priests wanted to read the precious books, they could not directly enter the archives. They had to get permission first, and then the warriors on duty would take out the books and give them to the people who read them. Some books could be registered and taken away, but some could only be read on the spot. It depended on the authority of the person. Amon found something very interesting. The warriors on duty in the archives did not understand the hieroglyphs, so they could not understand the books in the hieroglyphs that they guarded. But they were not completely illiterate. They all knew the labels on the shelves and cabinets. These labels were written in the secular language. When someone came to read the book, they only needed to say the label number, and the warriors on duty would know where to go to pick up which book. Chapter 92. The highest standard collection room was not only protected by a magic circle, but also required the approval of a high priest to borrow materials. Even the cleaning work could not be done by slaves. The warriors on duty were also divided into ranks. Amon was appointed by the adoratress, so of course he had the highest rank and was qualified to guard all the archives. Maria once said that she would give Amon a chance to read the records of Duk after he became a supreme warrior. As soon as Amon entered the Temple of Isis, he actually had the opportunity to read any ancient book here. No one knew that this foreign warrior actually knew the hieroglyph of Igut. But Aman could not read it openly. A warrior on duty holding a scroll and reading it would definitely arouse suspicion. Some of the most precious books were locked in special boxes and could only be opened with the company of a senior priest. He could only take advantage of the time when he was patrolling alone to tidy up the bookshelves and read. The higher the standard of the archives, the more leisurely it was. Few people came to borrow books, so Aman always found this opportunity. There were two kinds of books that interested Aman the most. One was the legends about the gods from a long time ago. Now that the empire of Igut had a unified divine decree, the different myths of the ancient times could only be found here. The other kind was the practice notes left by the mages and warriors of various periods, which were the precious wealth of countless people. After quietly reading some of the books he was interested in, Aman realized how precious the information left by Crazy Ol was. Bear must have come here and read all the valuable records. Crazy Ol must have received Bear's message. The records he left for Aman were condensed essences. Nietzsche had been to many places in his 100 years of life. Not only did he read the books of the Temple of Isis, but he also left them to Aman. But Aman still gained a lot here, because Crazy Ol only left him records related to the practice of magic. Many other materials also contained important information, which Crazy Ol could not tell Aman everything. What Aman was most interested in was the legend of Duk, but he could not find it in a short time. The archives of the Temple of Isis were so large that it would take more than a month to go through all of them even if he guarded one room a day. Aman could only read them secretly when no one was around. It was impossible for him to read all the books in a short time. This was the most leisurely time Aman had ever spent in his life. Sometimes he patrolled the archives with other warriors, and sometimes he stayed in a fixed place to help the priests who consulted the books. The warriors had their own quarters in the shrine. Aman had a separate hut. Although it was not big, it was comfortable enough to live in. The monthly salary was 5 gold coins, which was enough for an ordinary noble family to live in. The shrine of Isis was indeed luxurious. If Aman wanted to marry and start a family, he could also buy a house in Montefiore and have children. He could work in the Temple of Isis during the day and go home at night. But he still had to live in the hut when it was his turn to be on duty at night. Honorable warriors like him were not nobles, but they seemed to have some kind of halo because of the temple. Coupled with the good salary and leisure life, many families in the city of Isis were willing to marry their daughters to him. Aman was already a 5th-level warrior at such a young age, and he had an income of 5 gold coins a month. He was also a handsome young man, so of course he was very popular. Sometimes when he left the temple to buy food or eat in the city, there were always restaurant owners, shopkeepers, and the like who tried to get close to him, asking about his well-being and introducing girls to him. In this situation, Aman always refused with a smile. He really did not want to. Although everything seemed to be safe for the time being, Aman knew his identity and his burden. He was a sorcerer, and he wanted to solve the secrets of the gods. He had promised a goddess that he would find the survivors of Duk and help them rebuild their home. The road ahead was dangerous and difficult. Aman seldom went out. He spent most of his time in the archives of the Temple of Isis. He was probably the most dedicated warrior on duty. He had visited the prosperous city of Montefiore several times. His guide was Aesop, the slave of the merchant Sio. Aman kept his promise and paid a visit to Sio. When he learned that his benefactor had become an honorable warrior of the Temple of Isis, Sio was very surprised and enthusiastic. Sihathar even wanted to marry his daughter to Aman. He bragged to everyone he met that he had seen the future of this foreign warrior and that he was indeed a great man. But Aman preferred to take Aesop out with him. When they visited the streets and alleys, he listened to the driver tell all kinds of anecdotes, which were more interesting than the ancient books in the archives. Of course, Aman's main focus was still on the practice of 2 sides. He never stopped meditating every night. It was not convenient to practice alchemy openly in the temple of Isis, but it did not hinder the practice of strength. As for the practice of body arts, he was a warrior, so there was no doubt about it. Amon's injuries healed quickly, but his strength recovered very slowly. He felt that his body was going through a process of growth again. Although the recovery was slow, it was growing every day. When Amon felt that he had completely recovered, the growth did not stop. Amon was a little surprised to find that the growth was not only the power in his blood, but also the magic power in using magic. Was this the magic of the power of two sides? He could even see the changes in his body. From his bones to his muscles, he seemed to have gone through a baptism. His physical strength and endurance were already far beyond that of ordinary fifth-level warriors. This time, he seemed to have broken through some kind of limit. When the growth of his strength and the changes in his body finally reached a stable state, Amon clearly felt the changes in himself. Although he could recover his energy and magic power through magic meditation in the past, he still needed to sleep and rest after all. But now, as long as he meditated for a period of time every night, he could completely recover, even if he did not sleep for many days. If necessary, he could even go for a long time without eating, but he needed to use special magic meditation to replenish the power he had consumed. Then he did a test in private. He did not eat for half a month. Although he felt light and healthy, he could not go without food forever. There was still a limit to what he could bear. Was this the process of breaking through the limit from a fifth-level warrior to a sixth-level warrior? No wonder that warrior Haven still had such amazing power in the final battle after chasing him for so long. If Amon did not use the scroll in advance and used magic with the help of the staff at the last moment, he would have definitely fallen before Haven. One night, Amon was in a very quiet state of meditation. Finally, he felt that the slow growth of his strength in the past 6 months had stabilized. He had completely recovered. After recovering, Amon almost had a brand new body, and his strength was also much stronger than before. It was as if he had experienced a more perfect rebirth. Had he passed the physical test and become a sixth-level warrior? Did this mean that he had also improved his magic? If Lucien wanted to verify it, he only needed to take out the taroculus left by Crazy Ole and read the next piece of information. However, Amon did not dare to do this in the Temple of Isis. He tried his best to set up a magic circle in his own house, but there were too many powerful people here. Maybe even the gods were watching. One day, when it was not his turn to be on duty, Amon left the temple in the evening. Many warriors liked to drink and have fun at this time. Those who had families would go home, and those who did not would not come back until the next morning. It was rare for Amon to go out and relax. Montefiore was a large city. When he arrived at the north of the city, he first found a tavern to have a meal, and then he watched a performance. It was a long way back after dark, so he simply found a big inn to stay in. He asked for the best room with a small courtyard. Amon's income was very high, and he was very rich, but he had almost no place to spend money. It was not a big deal for him to go out for a while. In the middle of the night, he used a parangan to set up a magic circle in his bedroom to conceal his presence. Then he took out the staff and the taroculus, which he had not used for a long time. Crazy Ole's voice sounded in his ears again. "My child, I must congratulate you again. Reading this message, you have already achieved the 6th level of magic. Now I'm going to tell you something that you may not have recovered from. Becoming a 6th level mage means that you can practice advanced magic, but there is a requirement, which is that you must never stop meditating for a long period of time. Many 5th level mages could not advance because they did not do this. Once they stopped practicing magic for a certain period of time, they would have to start all over again. Don't go to the ancient records. There are no such clear records." This was the conclusion Bear came to after studying the records of all the supreme mages in the archives of the Isis shrine. Bear told me about it. Everyone's situation is different. It is hard to tell what kind of accumulation is needed to break through to the 6th level. Some may be fast, some may be slow. But the accumulation process cannot be interrupted, or else you will have to start all over again. A mage should consciously concentrate on his practice and not be disturbed by anything that happens to him. It is part of the process of breaking through. At this point, you can no longer deliberately practice magic for the sake of it. It is part of your life. Because of perseverance, pressure, or just luck, people can achieve it. But the best state is to get used to it. That is the only way to maintain the most peaceful state of mind during the meditation. Chapter 93. At the end of this message was the practice of various supreme magic, slightly different from the previous ones. This time, Crazy Ol did not introduce all the techniques of practicing and using supreme magic in detail. First, he gave a comprehensive introduction so that Amon could understand the practice of various kinds of magic. Then, he focused on the fields that Crazy Ol was best at, such as spatial magic, message magic, elemental magic, and so on. The practice of supreme magic consumed a great deal of time and energy. Even a supreme mage could not take care of everything at the same time. Nietzsche was an 8th level mage. His achievements in magic had not reached the pinnacle, but he was definitely one of the top great theologians. He had studied almost all kinds of magic and practice related to it. With Amon's current convenience, he could already read all kinds of supreme magic books on his own, which was probably beyond Crazy Ol's expectation. But Crazy Ol's message in the Taroculus was still very valuable. He explained everything in detail in the most concise way. Not to mention what he was good at, he even used the best parts of other supreme mages' experiences to teach Amon the magic he hadn't practiced to a very high level. If Amon was left to explore, study, and verify on his own, who knew how many years and efforts it would take? Crazy Ol did this because he wanted to unravel the secrets of the gods. Although he did not fulfill his wish in the end, Amon benefited a lot from this legacy. Reading this message, Amon immediately had a plan to practice supreme magic. He would use Crazy Ol's teaching as the core and the various books in the Temple of Isis as supplements. However, Crazy Ol was not good at body arts, and the method of practicing the power of 2 sides left by Bear had already been verified. If he continued to explore, everything would depend on Amon himself. Although they were both in the Temple of Isis, Amon rarely saw Maria, except on public occasions such as sacrificial ceremonies. At that time, the adoratress would be in the center of the worship of tens of thousands of people, and Amon could only stand and watch from afar. Normally, Amon did not have the opportunity to see Maria alone. The Temple of Isis was as large as a small city. It was almost impossible for the high and mighty adoratress to have direct contact with a warrior on duty in the archives. The adoratress would never come to the archives to borrow materials. If she wanted to read any book, there would be someone to bring it to her. In theory, Gabriel did not have to come to the archives in person. But she had been there several times, and every time she came, it was Amon who was on duty in the archives. She claimed that she was here to retrieve the secret books for the adoratress. Because the books were very important, she came in person. Amon had a feeling that Maria wanted Gabriel to come and see how he was doing. Maybe it was just his wishful thinking, because the books that Gabriel came to retrieve were the most precious. Even Amon was not qualified to see them. Usually, they were locked in boxes protected by magic. The key was in the hands of the full-time priest in charge of the archives, and it could only be opened with the witness of the warrior on duty. Gabriel's status was higher than the full-time priest in charge of the archives, so sometimes he would bring the key directly and open the box with Amon as witness. The last time this supreme warrior came to return the books, he had a brief chat with Amon and asked him how his injury was recovering. At that time, Amon was in a state of slow growth and answered Gabriel's question truthfully. Gabriel was a little surprised and only said that he would find an opportunity to talk to Amon about the practice of body arts. Of course, it was more than he wanted to wait for the guidance of such a supreme warrior. Aman thanked him repeatedly and then asked what the adoratress wanted to see. Gabriel replied that this book was very important for him to break through the 7th level and become a supreme mage. The test to become a 7th level mage was the fusion of faith. Aman had just passed the test of body arts, the breakthrough of the limit, and the power of 2 sides had been cultivated to the 6th level. According to the context of Bayer's last words, the next test he faced was likely to be the fusion of faith, of magic. As for whether this was the case or not, he still needed to verify it himself. A book that was very important for the advancement of the adoratress of the Temple of Isis to become a supreme mage, of course, made Aman very curious. Coincidentally, this time Gabriel came and went in a hurry. After returning the book, he gave the key to the box to Aman and asked him to return the key to the full-time priest, so Aman had the opportunity to read this precious book. This book was written by the adoratress of the Temple of Isis 200 years ago. To Aman's slight surprise, this book did not describe anything about the practice of magic, nor did it mention a word about the test of magic advancement. The whole book was a hymn. Not only the words were gorgeous, but also the sincere and true description. Even Aman was deeply shocked when he read it. Even if one did not believe in the existence of the goddess Isis, one had to admire the spirit of the adoratress' faith. It was real and powerful, this was how Aman felt. However, what kind of mystery did this hymn describe about the integration of faith, and what kind of help and inspiration Maria would get from it? Aman was still pondering. Gabriel said that he would talk to Aman about the practice of body arts when he had the chance, but more than a month had passed. Even when Aman was sure that he had achieved the 6th level of the power of 2 sides, he did not see Gabriel again. Just a few days after Aman read Crazy Ol's message, the annual Blessing of the Goddess began. This was one of the most important festivals in Montefiore. During this ceremony, Aman finally understood what Gabriel had been busy with. Of course, the goddess Isis would not show up in person. The person who represented the goddess blessing was the adoratress. This festival had not been held in Montefiore for a full 33 years, for no other reason than the absence of the adoratress. 2 years before Maria came to the Temple of Isis, the ceremony was not held. It was said that the adoratress was growing up under the goddess' care. The climax of the ceremony was after the sacrifice, when the adoratress would bless the people in the square in front of the temple. The square in front of the shrine of Isis was very large, and it could hold hundreds of thousands of people if they squeezed together. Almost all the residents of Memphis had come, and there were even farmers and shepherds from outside the city, as well as citizens from other cities who had heard the news. It was very difficult to maintain the order of so many people without any accidents of crowding and trampling. Even Aman was transferred to the square to be on duty. He stood among the crowd with a spear in his hand. When the blessing ceremony began, Maria, wearing a golden crown and holding a scepter, stepped onto the high platform in front of the temple. The priests stood around her and set up a magic formation. When the bell rang, the people in the square knelt toward the high platform. They saw Maria's expression was solemn. She silently chanted something and slowly raised the adoratress' scepter. The god's tear emitted a golden light. The light was very faint at first, but the area it illuminated was very wide. The magic formation set up by the priests gathered in the air and turned into a golden beam of light that shot into the sky. The beam of light became brighter and brighter, and gradually the whole sky was plated with gold. The golden sky was a rare spectacle in the world, and the people kneeling in the square were in deep awe. When the sky was golden, the beam of light disappeared. It looked like the adoratress' scepter was raised high and plated the sky with a layer of golden brilliance. The bell of the temple rang melodiously and slowly, echoing in the square. As the bell rang, a milky white light slowly floated down from the golden brilliance of the sky, like a veil or a milk waterfall, or like the hazy moonlight. This was the blessing of Isis. Maria had used it to treat Aman's injury, and now she cast it on hundreds of thousands of people. This was a high-level effect of magic. It could not only heal injuries, but also eliminate pain, wash away fatigue, restore physical strength, and give people confidence, strength, and courage. Such a blessing ceremony was an important reason why the people of Igut worshipped the goddess Isis. At the same time, it was also the symbol of the temple of Isis. Although there were nearly 100 priests holding their scepters and set up a magic formation to cast this magic on hundreds of thousands of people and let everyone present feel its effect at the same time, Maria on the high platform had to be at least a supreme mage. She had finally succeeded in advancing and restored the most important ceremony of the Temple of Isis. From this moment on, she was the true adoratress of the Temple of Isis, and her position was unshakable. Aman also knelt in the crowd. No one knew better than him how soft and warm the blessing of Isis was. He had a familiar feeling, and when he knelt, he felt a sense of peace and tranquility from the bottom of his heart. The effect of this large-scale casting of magic was obviously not as good as when Maria healed Aman alone when she was still a 6th-level mage, but everyone in the square felt it. Everyone knelt on the ground devoutly and attentively. Hundreds of thousands of people were silent, and few people noticed what was happening around them. At this moment, Aman suddenly became alert. Unexpectedly, he bounced up from the ground and threw the spear in his hand to the left. In terms of pure strength, at this time, Aman was almost comparable to a supreme warrior. The spear flew out with a sharp and subtle tremor, and there was a circle of silver light in the air, like a ripple caused by a fish in the water. The spear met a black crossbow bolt in the air, which was 5 feet long and as thick as a wine cup. It suddenly shot from the crowd towards the adoratress on the high platform. The seemingly dim crossbow bolt collided with the spear in the air, making a roar like waves hitting the reef. The spear, which could even pierce a brick wall, was lightly bounced off. What was even more incredible was that the crossbow bolt did not change direction. It only paused in the air, and then, as if it suddenly gained new strength, continued to fly towards Maria. The people knelt on the ground and did not see this scene at all. The sound of the crossbow bolt colliding with the spear in the air happened to ring at the same time as the bell in the temple. People would never dream that there would be an assassin in such a sacred and solemn ceremony. Chapter 94. Almost all the warriors and mages in the city of Montefiore were in the square. The security was tight, but the warriors' main duty was to maintain order. They never dreamed that there would be an assassin. There were too many people in the square, and it was impossible to prevent people with bad intentions from sneaking in. But on such an occasion, trying to make trouble was no different from courting death, and yet someone did it. The assassin's timing was very clever. It was when the milky white light from the golden sky shone, and everyone was kneeling on the ground. Looking at the size of the arrow, only the strongest crossbow could shoot it, but the assassin used a bow. The bowstring was originally wrapped around his waist, and the spine of the bow and the arrow were hidden in a cane. The assassin disguised himself as a hobbling old man. Taking advantage of the people kneeling and praying, he suddenly drew the bow and shot the arrow. His movements were as fast as lightning. Not to mention the power and accuracy of the arrow, even the sudden movement of the arrow could only be done by a supreme warrior. It was too difficult for the arrow to hit Maria. How could the adoratress not have protection when she cast magic? The magic formation was a barrier. The assassin wanted to take advantage of the people's relaxation. The arrow was very strange. When it bounced off Aman's spear, it paused in the air for a moment, and then its speed became even faster. This pause was enough for the guards to react. There were 12 supreme warriors under the high platform where the adoratress was casting the spell, and 6 of them were facing this direction. Several sword rays rose into the sky and almost simultaneously cut the arrow flying in the air. Even if the arrow was made of the strongest material in the world, it would still be smashed to pieces. But something unexpected happened again. There was a violent wave of power in the air, but there was no sound. Aman could only sense it using magic detection. Every time the sword ray hit the arrow trembled as if it had turned into a shadow. The violent vibration made it almost impossible to see it clearly. It paused in the air several times, but did not change direction and continued to fly forward. Instead, it shot into the air covered by the magic formation. Amon sucked in a breath of cold air. To be able to shoot such a powerful arrow, it was definitely a rare supreme warrior. But the scene of his javelin and the sword rays of several supreme warriors intercepting the arrow reminded Amon of a very clever magic, energy magic. There was no such thing as low or middle-level energy magic. The starting point was high-level energy magic. Until now, Amon was barely able to start practicing it. This kind of magic was very esoteric and even difficult to understand. All kinds of magic were about communicating with the energy of the outside world and transforming it into the power of the laws of nature. Energy magic was pure use of energy. Although Amon had not practiced it yet, he had a feeling that the energy magic contained in this arrow could only be achieved by a supreme mage. The impact, conversion, and consumption of energy could not change the direction of the arrow. Before the arrow's power was completely consumed, it would continue to fly towards its target. How could this be? No one could be both a supreme warrior and a supreme mage. This was the extreme of the power of two sides that Amon pursued. Was the assassin a god? There was another possibility. The arrow itself was an extremely precious magic artifact, and it was shot by a supreme warrior and a supreme mage at the same time. The warrior shot the arrow with all his strength, and the mage cast energy magic on the arrow. There was no time for Amon to think carefully. He wanted to continue to stop the arrow, but it was too late. He turned and immediately rushed in the direction of the arrow, taking away the javelin of another warrior as he ran. It was the warrior closest to Amon. He was kneeling devoutly on the ground, not knowing what had happened. He didn't even know that Amon had taken away his javelin. The arrow was shot towards the platform. Suddenly, a golden light shield appeared in the void. The arrow was frozen in the air for about a breath's time, then it passed through the shield and shot towards Maria. This distance was very close, only a dozen steps away. Maria was standing on the platform, casting an extremely difficult magic. She couldn't move until she stopped. But at this moment, a man had jumped onto the platform and stood in front of the adoratress. It was Gabriel. The blessing of the people did not stop. The echoes of the bell were still floating in the square. Maria's body was surrounded by various kinds of protection, including a transparent air elemental armor, an invisible energy shield, and a magical shield that flashed with colorful light. All the brilliant mages in Montefiore were under the platform at this moment. More than half of them were operating the magic circle, but the others were not just for show. They immediately took action to protect the adoratress. Everything happened too fast. It was not a test of people's ability, but their reflexes. Maria could have dodged, but that would mean that the ceremony would be interrupted. She chose to trust the people around her. The shields should have been able to block the arrow, but Gabriel could not let that happen. She did something that was out of line, only the saintess could ascend the dais, and she jumped onto it. Gabriel swung the sword in her right hand. The silver sword trembled violently when it hit the black arrow. The parangons inlaid on the edge of the sword shattered, and the sword itself broke into several pieces. Then time seemed to stop. Gabriel's left hand held the arrow, and the tip of the arrow touched the armor on her chest. Her grip was very steady. The arrow trembled like a struggling viper, and blood seeped out of Gabriel's fingernails. The arrow was blocked. When the trembling gradually stopped, countless cracks appeared on the body of the arrow, and then it shattered into pieces and fell to the ground. Amon did not catch up with the assassin. After shooting the arrow, the assassin had already jumped high and flew to the edge of the square. When Amon turned around, he only saw the back of the assassin. Then there were people flying in the air and on the ground. They accurately stepped on the narrow space between the crowd and chased the assassin out of the square. On the platform, Maria's lips moved slightly. She ordered, "Vord, lead the mages, Ankh, lead the warriors to catch the assassin. Burk, continue to operate the magic circle. Do not interrupt the ceremony. The shadow of the dragon, command the order in the square. There must be no chaos. Vord was a 9th-level mage and the chief high priest of the Temple of Isis. The other 2 high priests were Julian and Burke. Ankh was an 8th-level warrior and the chief guardian supreme warrior of the Temple of Isis. The shadow of the dragon was another supreme warrior. For the first time, Maria publicly gave orders to command these people at the same time. In an emergency, there was no room for hesitation. Vord led 2 supreme mages and Ankh led 2 supreme warriors. A total of 6 people chased after the assassin. Looking at the speed of the assassin's escape, ordinary people could not catch up at all. This was a real assassin. Regardless of whether his attack hit or not, he would immediately escape thousands of miles away. If one's reaction was slightly slower, they would not even be able to touch his shadow. Amon couldn't help at all. He turned around and picked up the javelin. When he looked up again, he saw the assassin jump out of the square. The other assassin threw something in the air, which turned into a shuttle in the air. The shuttle wrapped around the 2 of them and flew away. Sure enough, the assassin was not alone. There was another person at the edge of the square to receive him, and he had already prepared a magic artifact to escape. The magic used by the receiver was so brilliant, it was obvious that he was a top supreme mage. The step that the assassin took made Amon feel like he saw a familiar shadow. He had only seen the legendary first warrior of the continent, Enkidu, with such amazing strength and speed, and his figure was too similar. If it was really Enkidu, then the person who received him must be Gilgamesh. These 2 people were not afraid of anything, even the gods. If it was really Enkidu and Gilgamesh, they had the ability to do so, but why would they come to Montefiore to assassinate the adoratress? It did not make sense in any way, and these 2 heroes did not look like people who would be assassins. Amon did not see who the 2 people were, and he only had some doubts in his heart, but he could not be sure. This was a shocking event, but except for the guards around the high platform and Amon in the distance, the hundreds of thousands of people kneeling in the square did not even notice it. Everything happened within a few breaths of the echoing bell. The adoratress ordered that the ceremony should not be interrupted and that the people should not be alarmed on the spot, and the trackers had already followed the assassin. With 3 supreme mages and 3 supreme warriors, coupled with the protection of the magic formation in Montefiore, it would be difficult for any assassin to escape. When the blessing ceremony was over, as usual, there was a grand carnival, and the people in the city shouted praises to the goddess Isis. This grand ceremony had been expected for 33 years. In the midst of the carnival, there was a hidden tension in the atmosphere of Montefiore. The protection function of the magic formation on the city wall was quietly activated, and the detection function was also activated to the extreme. The city guards did not participate in the carnival, and patrolling warriors could be seen in every corner. The city of Montefiore looked as if nothing had happened. The adoratress completed all the rituals of the ceremony according to tradition, and at the same time, continued to order more people to track down the assassins. Warriors and priests on duty were not allowed to go home. Amon was transferred to guard the city wall that night, and the next day he returned to the Temple of Isis to guard the archives. After the blessing ceremony, he received orders not to tell the outside world what he saw in the square, because the adoratress did not want to cause panic among the people. The news that there were assassins at the blessing ceremony of Isis eventually spread inside the Temple of Isis, and Amon also heard the private discussions of his colleagues. It was said that the chief high priest Vord and his men did not catch the assassins and let them escape. On the 3rd night, Amon was suddenly informed that the chief high priest Vord had summoned him. He was taken to a majestic hall, which was not lit with candles or oil lamps, but was decorated with bright parangons, which were actually illuminated by magic. In the hall sat not only the chief high priest Vord, but also the lord of Montefiore, Giatujin, and the supreme warrior Gabriel. To Amon's slight disappointment, Maria was not present. Both the chief high priest Vord and the Lord Jiatujin praised Amon's actions in the square, but the one who asked questions was Gabriel. She said in an approving tone, "The square is too big. Although you don't ask for any reward, as the governor, I must reward you. This is an order that cannot be refused. Do you have anything else to say?" Amon raised his head and said, "Since that's the case, I thank the governor. Actually, I just want to ask if the saintess is well." Gabriel said, "Of course the saintess is safe and sound, but there are many things that she has to deal with these few days. Amon, you can leave for now. The saintess will summon you when she has time." The governor of Montefiore rewarded him with a large sum of money, as well as a set of warriors' armor and weapons. Naturally, they were all top-notch items, but they were nothing compared to Amon's personal collection. Amon was now a 6th-level warrior, and his achievements were not low. From the second day onwards, the 6th-level warrior Amon was promoted to the captain of the Temple of Isis's archives. His monthly salary rose from 5 gold coins to 15 gold coins, and he was given a residence with his own courtyard. His colleagues were extremely envious and congratulated him. Amon didn't care about these things. What he was looking forward to was Gabriel's words that the saintess would summon him when she had time. He really wanted to see Maria. For the past 6 months, he hadn't had the chance to see her face clearly. On the same night that Amon was talking to High Priest Vord and the others, in the distant Assyrian kingdom, in the royal palace of Nineveh, 2 people were having a secret discussion. The one sitting in the middle was the king of Assyria, Sinak, and beside him was the prime minister of Assyria, Lord Alpha. The prime minister was in his 60s, and his body was obviously a little fat. He sat there leaning forward, and his belly stretched the clothes around his waist. He said worriedly, "Your Majesty, it has been 3 days since the Queen and the Imperial Advisor attempted to assassinate the Saintess in Montefiore, but there hasn't been any news." Sinak, the king of Assyria, was not even 40 years old. He was well built, and his eyes were deep. His nose was a little curved, and his appearance was very dignified. He smiled faintly and said, "I know very well how capable Queen Samir is. No one would have thought that someone would try to assassinate her. It's not a problem for her to escape after the attack. With the help of the Imperial Advisor, Faust, it's even more foolproof. Montefiore is tens of thousands of miles away from here. It's normal for no news to reach us in just 3 days. All we have to do is wait." Alpha added, "Your Majesty, if you have such thoughts again, please think twice before you act. You actually sent 2 people who are so important to the kingdom to risk their lives. I didn't expect that you would order Her Majesty the Queen to be an assassin." Sinak smiled again. "Actually, this is the idea of the Imperial Advisor, Faust. He volunteered to do this, and I gave the order in the name of the king. Only then would the Queen do it herself. The Imperial Advisor is a man of great foresight. Regardless of whether the assassination of the Saintess succeeds or not, the 3 kingdoms will definitely be in chaos for a while, which is most beneficial to Assyria." Alpha was a little puzzled. 3 kingdoms? Are you talking about Igut, Hittite, and Babylon, Your Majesty? Sinak smiled proudly. "That's right. Assassinating the Saintess during the blessing ceremony is tantamount to declaring war on the empire of Igut. The pharaohs of Igut, Lazith II, is a proud and ambitious man. How could he give up such a great opportunity to start a war?" Alpha asked, "Who will he declare war on?" Sinak slapped the armrest of his chair. "Of course not. The one who is in conflict with Igut is Hittite, which is gradually breaking away from its fate of submitting to the empire of Igut." Alpha asked, "Then why does Babylon have to be involved?" The king blinked his eyes. "They won't be able to catch the assassin. Think about it, Prime Minister. Who on the continent has the ability to escape after assassinating the Saintess? Who would have the guts to do so?" Alpha suddenly reacted, "Enkidu and Gilgamesh." Sinaka's laughter shook the roof. "Prime Minister, your first reaction is the same. It's their fault for being in the limelight. There's no way Lazith too would not have thought of this. Alpha looked worried. Even if everyone is suspicious, what reason would Enkidu and Gilgamesh have to do this? You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.